Hey guys, tonight we begin an unexpected voyage to pre-dawn on the Nile, tracing the surprisingly refined laundry rituals of ancient Egypt. Imagine the hush of river murmurs, the faint clink of natron crystals in clay jars, and the soft swoosh of linen in cool water. If you enjoy this cozy glimpse into history, please like and subscribe, but only if it truly sparks your curiosity. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can drift into slumber together around the globe. Now is the moment to dim the lights, switch on a gentle fan, and settle into your favorite cozy spot. Let the anticipation wash over you like a first rinse in clear river currents. In just a few breaths, you'll join me as dawn breaks over sandy banks and stone scrub slabs. Now the story begins. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and focus on the tale. Soon you will drift into restful slumber. The screen now fades to darkness. Before the first pale glimmer of dawn, the world along the Nile holds its breath in quiet anticipation. The eastern horizon wears a faint blush, as though some distant hand has brushed a thin veil of pink across the sky, promising the coming light. In this delicate hush, a lone figure approaches the riverbank. Barefoot, she steps onto the damp sand, each footfall yielding a soft sigh as toes press into the cool grains. The night's residual chill clings to her skin, but in the early hour, that sharpness offers welcome clarity. Around her, the air tastes faintly of water and earth, mingled with the scent of long-submerged clay and the promise of warm sun yet to come. She pauses for a moment, inhaling deeply. Under the veil of darkness, the Nile appears as a ribbon of deepest silver, its surface alive with murmurs. Here and there, a subtle current circles submerged stones, murmuring secrets to the riverbank. The gentle trickle of water against clay-lined banks feels alive, as though the river itself breathes in rhythm with her own lungs. Somewhere upriver, a reed warbler begins its tentative call, the fragile note lingering in the cool air. A pair of night herons wings northward, their silhouettes fleeting against the dim sky. Every sound feels magnified in this pre-dawn stillness, each breath a sacred offering to the coming day. From a small satchel slung at her hip, she draws a woven mat, its fibers soft from years of careful use. Unfurling it with precise, reverent movements, she places it upon the sand. The mat's rough weave provides a stable cradle for the baskets she will soon unpack. Before her, a simple wooden box holds flint and pyrite for kindling. Beside it, a pair of clay jars sealed with palm fiber stoppers wait patiently. A leather strap suspends a bundle of smooth scrubbing stones carved from riverbed pebbles. Each tool has its place, as familiar to her as the lines of her own hands. Here at the water's edge, she assembles them with deliberate calm, as though preparing for a ritual older than memory itself. The eastern sky grows a touch brighter, the blush of dawn deepening to pale rose. She squats by the mat, running her fingers over the rim of a clay jar. Its surface is etched with the faintest impressions of leaves, telling of the humble potter who shaped it from Nile mud. As she lifts the lid, a gentle puff of cool air escapes, carrying with it the subtle aroma of clay and the faintest trace of stale dust. She breathes in that scent and lets it settle in her chest, grounding her in the task to come. A second jar contains natron, the crystallized mineral harvested from nearby marshlands. Even in this low light, she can see the pale, glimmering granules packed inside, ready to transform river water into a gentle cleansing bath. Behind her, the river's song grows louder, a hush broken only by the soft slap of water against submerged stones and the distant croak of amphibians awakening. She lifts her gaze to the far bank, where slender palms sway in the slightest breeze. Their long fronds tickle the sky, brushing against each other in a hushed rustle that echoes the world's slow stirring. In moments like this, she feels the pulse of the river and the heartbeat of the land within her own pulse, as though her spirit and the Nile's are bound in an age-old embrace. She stands and carries a lightweight basket toward the water's edge. Inside lie the smooth limestone slab destined for scrubbing, and nestled beside it, bundles of soapwort roots, still damp with marsh mud. As her feet sink gently into the shallow water, the coolness envelopes her ankles, reminding her of every sunrise spent in these same silent waters. Each step releases tiny bubbles as air escapes from the sand beneath her toes. The river glints in response to the growing light, reflecting soft streaks of rose and gold even before the sun's disk has crested the horizon. Kneeling once more, she dips her hands into the current. The water laps over her wrists, cool and clear, carrying the faint warmth of the depths. She swirls her fingers, watching ripples fan outward in concentric circles. With calm deliberation, she fills a clay pot with this liquid, careful to keep it free of sand and debris. When the pot is 3/4 full, she sets it aside on the mat, its surface gleaming like polished metal in the early glow. The simple act feels profound, water drawn from the Nile, destined to become the very elixir that will lift centuries of stains from the linen of households along the river. She straightens, brushing stray strands of hair from her forehead. Though her body is attuned to the chill of the morning, she senses the sun's promise of warmth growing. Even now, a single ray breaks free of the horizon's edge, casting a slender beam of light across the water's surface. In that beam, the river seems to shimmer, alive with dancing motes. It is enough to make her momentarily close her eyes, to feel the warmth kiss her eyelids. Then she exhales slowly, gathering the readiness she needs to begin. On the mat, her tools stand poised. The wooden scrub board, its surface worn smooth by countless cleansings, rests beside the clay jars. She touches the board gently, feeling the grooves where grain has worn away. Those grooves tell of hands much like her own, long vanished into history, yet their work lives on in the silent testimony of this tool. In that quiet connection, she senses the weight and honor of her role, guardian of a ritual that, though simple, has sustained families and communities for generations. Now, with practiced movements, she arranges her baskets. One holds fine linen tunics, neatly folded and waiting their turn. Another contains heavier cloths, stained from daily labor in workshops and fields. She sorts them by texture and tone even before the cleansing begins, her mind already mapping the order in which each will be treated. The river flows beside her, a constant companion, its murmur urging her forward with a steady pulse. A distant cacophony of birds heralds the approach of daylight, kingfishers chattering from low-hanging branches, wagtails flickering along the bank, and in the reeds, the soft coo of doves waking from their night's nest. In that chorus, she finds a gentle encouragement. The hush of early morning transforms into a living symphony, and she, poised on the river's edge, becomes part of its orchestration. She closes her eyes for a moment, offering a silent gratitude to the Nile. Its waters will carry her efforts down the centuries, cleansing the linen that will swaddle infants, drape noble shoulders, and comfort the weary at day's end. With a final, deep breath, she opens her eyes and reaches for the first garment. The morning has fully robed itself in light now, pale gold spilling across the sands and glinting off pottery rims. The time has come to begin, gently, mindfully, and with the respect due to the oldest of rituals. Here, at the threshold of dawn, the laundress prepares to immerse herself in the tender labor that transforms mud and water into spotless cloth, weaving her own story into the grand tapestry of the Nile's eternal flow. As the first pale fingers of dawn eased across the Nile's broad mirror, the laundress straightened from her small mat of woven papyrus. In the quiet residue of pre-dawn, the world felt hushed, as though the river itself were holding its breath, waiting for the sun to rise. She gathered her slender baskets of tools, each carved from reeds or shaped of clay, and set them gently aside. Now her focus turned from the river's gentle lap to a different ritual, lighting the morning hearth. She took a handful of driftwood fragments scavenged from yesterday's current, twisted lengths of tamarisk root, bleached by sun and water, and slender sticks of acacia bark pared smooth by the river's flow. Beside them, she placed a handful of dry reeds, harvested long ago and stored in the shade of her home. In a shallow depression she'd formed in the clay-lined bank, she arranged a circle of flat, round stones, from the riverbed, smooth and pale, gathered and warmed by yesterday's sun. These stones would cradle her fire, keeping it safe from wandering currents and stray winds. At the edge of her circle, she laid a small clump of finely shredded grasses, pale tufts that she had teased apart with her fingertips until they were light as down. This would serve as tinder. She inhaled deeply, smelling the faint sweetness of the dry grasses mingled with the cool morning air. The birds overhead were just beginning their morning chatter, a gentle chorus that lent the silence a soft underlay of distant warbles. With practiced fingers, she selected 2 pieces of flint and a piece of pyrite, each one held tightly in her palm. The pyrite, a gift from her neighbor who had panned it from a distant tributary, glimmered gold and bronze in the dim light. She struck the flint against its surface just once, crack, and a tiny spark flew free, dancing like a firefly against the gloom. She cupped her hands around the spark as it landed on the shredded grasses and, almost imperceptibly, it glowed. A wisp of smoke curled upward, gray as a rising mist. She shielded this tentative flame from the breeze, leaning her body forward in a slow arc, her breath measured and low so as not to snuff out the warmth. When the flames flickered to life, first timid, then growing surer, she gently blew, coaxing air beneath the glowing embers. The grasses brightened to gold, then to orange, then to a steady crackle of flame. Tiny sparks leapt from the tinder, met by dry reeds and finally the driftwood. One by one, the pieces kindled with a sound that was soft and hollow, like distant river stones rolling together. Once the fire had settled into a low, steady glow, she lifted a small clay bowl in one hand, a shallow dish that she carried filled with fresh Nile pebbles, and, with her free hand, scooped clear water from the river. The stones, still cool to the touch, were dropped into the water with muted plunks. Then she tilted the clay bowl over the hearth and poured the water onto the heated stones, sending a thin, hissing steam into the air. The moisture rose in curling ribbons, carrying with it a faint, earthy scent. Even in the cool morning, the steam felt warm against her skin as she leaned over, eyes half closed, inhaling its gentle heat. This steaming ritual was as ancient as the river itself, practiced by laundresses and dyers long before her time. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her how to coax fire from flint, how to nurture a flame so small it might vanish in a single breath. She remembered the old woman's calloused hands, the way her fingers moved with the memory of generations. In the hiss of steam and the steady crackle of wood, she felt connected to a long line of women who had made their living and their homes along these very banks. When the stones had steamed fully, small beads of water dancing on their hot surfaces, she scooped them back into her clay bowl. Now steaming, they would serve another purpose later in the day, heating water to soften the cleaning agents she would mix for her laundry. But for this moment, she let the steam dissipate into the still air, watching as the river breeze carried it away in silver tendrils. She gathered a supply of flat stones, slabs of limestone smoothed by the river's current, for scrubbing, stacking them neatly within arm's reach of the hearth. Alongside them, she placed 2 slender wooden paddles, their edges worn by many seasons of folding and pressing linen. A tightly woven basket held her flint, her pyrite and a length of untreated sisal cord, braided into a loop she could slip around her wrist to keep her tools close. Shadows shifted as the sky brightened, turning from violet to pale rose. The firelight danced against the stones and the damp clay, glowing amber where wood lay thickest. She could feel its warmth at her fingertips even as the morning air still brushed cool against her ankles. She closed her eyes, simply listening, the snap of small twigs, the river's smooth murmur, the distant caw of a heron departing its roost. Rising, she added another length of driftwood to the flame, then pressed 2 stones together, generating another spark and feeding it to a waiting tuft of grass. She worked slowly, deliberately, her motions unhurried in the soft lamplight of daybreak. Each gesture was familiar, practiced, yet always accorded her full attention, as though the quality of her focus lent life to the fire itself. Beyond the circle of stones, the Nile glowed silver, the current alive with the promise of the new day. She tugged at her braided cord, tightening the loop of sisal about her wrist so that her tools hung at her side. Then she reached for the clay pot, its surface cool in her hand, etched with a simple pattern of reeds. It was empty now, its water carried to the stones, but she would refill it soon. For a moment, she sat on a flat stone beside the hearth, feeling the ground settle beneath her. The heat from the fire rose to meet the first rays of sunlight, and the mingled warmth of earth and flame and river filled her chest. In this quiet space between darkness and full day, she felt the gentle stirrings of readiness, the readiness to mix her ingredients, to plunge linen into congealed alkali, to coax out mud and oil and the residue of everyday life. Outside this circle of stones and fire, the world would soon awaken fully. Fishermen would haul in their nets, merchants would begin to fold open their stalls, donkeys would bray along winding paths. But here, in the amber glow of the hearth, time felt folded inward. The past and the present met, her grandmother's hands shaping flame, the river's timeless flow beneath her feet, the promise of freshly laundered linen on the horizon of the day. As she rose to her feet, she scattered a few more dry reeds onto the embers and watched them catch fire, glowing bright and cheerful. She knew the hearth would not need constant tending, not yet, but it would serve as a focal point, a source of steady heat and comfort. Every so often she would bend to draw the embers closer, to add a stick or two, but for now it was sufficient. With a final glance at the firelight dancing over clay and stone, she turned to gather her next set of tools. The morning hearth was lit, a bridge between the cooling river and the warmth she would soon harness. In the gentle hiss of steam and the faint pop of wood, she heard the day's first lullaby, a quiet invitation to proceed, at an ancient, unhurried pace, into the chapters of labor and ritual yet to come. The pale glow of dawn still lingers low on the horizon as the laundress turns her gaze from the smoldering hearth toward the neat array of implements laid upon the woven mat. Here, at the threshold between night and morning, she performs the quiet ceremony of assembly. Each tool, each vessel, each smooth stone must be readied before the first fibers of linen can meet soap, ash, and water. In this chapter, the simple act of gathering and inspecting her implements becomes its own gentle ritual, preparing both body and mind for the day's slow, immersing work. A hush pervades the riverbank. Though the fire's embers flicker still beneath the clay kettle, its warmth seeps into the cool air, mingling with the faint scent of wood smoke and the distant sweetness of marsh grasses. The laundress kneels before her collection of tools. In front of her, 3 broad slabs of pale limestone lie side by side, their surfaces burnished nearly smooth by decades of careful use. She stretches out a slender hand, fingertips grazing the flat plane of the first slab. The stone is cool beneath her skin, its grooves and ridges felt only by the slightest touch. She closes her eyes for a heartbeat, recalling the first time she inherited this very slab from her mother. Then, the rhythm of linen pressed against stone felt like a prayer, now it feels like second nature. Running her fingertips over the slab's length, she notes a tiny fissure near one corner, a hairline crack that has persisted for seasons. She whispers a soft apology to the stone, grateful for the many garments it has whitened without complaint, even as it ages in quiet dignity. Gently, she lifts the other 2 slabs, examining their fine grain and subtle variations of color. One bears faint stains of ochre from long-healed spots of earth, the other's surface is nearly unblemished, save for the most delicate linens. She nods in silent agreement that all 3 will serve today's wash. To her right, a row of wooden paddles, the beaters, rests against a low stump. Each has its own curve, patina, and gentle weight, carved from acacia or tamarisk wood. She reaches for the smallest first, a paddle carved so that its handle flows seamlessly into a broad, spoon-like head. This is reserved for the fine undergarments, the lightest fabrics dyed in pale hues and woven with the softest cotton blends. She lifts it by the slender neck, feeling its smooth grain warm beneath her fingers, and taps its head twice against the stump in a soft, hollow rhythm. Satisfied, she stands it upright once more. Next, she selects a larger paddle, its surface worn to a gentle sheen. This one has curved edges that cradle coarser tunics and heavier draping wraps. She examines the paddle's edge for any splinter or rough patch that might catch on linen threads. Finding none, she nods and sets it beside its smaller companion. Finally, she touches the widest beater, choosing it for sheets and textiles still weighted by river mud or stubborn incense stains. The handle shows the faintest hint of a crack where it once met a hidden knot in the wood, but it holds firm, and she accepts its slight imperfection. In every tool there is a story, and she greets each one as an old friend ready for the day's labor. Beyond the paddle stands a trio of clay vats in graduated sizes, their rims thickly glazed to resist the wash of alkaline water within. The largest jar is nearly half her height. She lifts it gingerly to test its heft. When filled, it will hold the pre-soaked solution, a fragrant, frothy mixture of natron crystals, soft ash, and crushed soapwort root steeped in warmed Nile water. She balances the jar back onto the mat, listening to the faint hollow note as the clay meets woven reed. The second vat, smaller but equally stout, will receive the first plunge of rinsed garments before they move to the river's edge. The third, the smallest, will be reserved for targeted stain treatments, a thick paste of ash and clay applied with a carved wooden spatula. She traces a finger along its lip, noting the even glaze and faint spiraling maker's mark at the base. At her feet lies a carefully stacked set of woven baskets, each shaped from river cane and stamped with a simple motif, 3 rippling lines representing the Nile's flow. The top basket carries linen bands dyed crimson, the next holds garments of pale undyed flax, and the others await the day's sorting. She lifts the first basket, testing the weight, then turns it over to inspect the underside. One handle shows a few loose strands where the cane has frayed. With gentle precision she weaves them back into place, twisting each fiber until it locks tight. A small repair such as this need not wait until later, better to mend now, before any heavy load disturbs the balance. Satisfied, she turns the basket right side up and presses it against her shoulder, breathing in the fresh scent of dry reeds. The second basket reveals a more pressing fault. A diagonal tear runs along one side, nearly severing 2 strands of woven cane. She sets the basket down and retrieves from her belt a slender awl carved from bone. With slow, practiced movements she threads a length of waxed linen cord through the cane's broken strands, binding them together in a neat, crisscross stitch. Each pull tightens the repair, and she smooths the cord flat against the weave. As she works, a kingfisher calls from across the water, its sharp cry punctuating the quiet. For a moment she pauses, letting the sound drift over her like a benediction, then returns to her mending until the basket stands sound once more. Around her, the sky has lightened to a soft blue, and the air warms in small degrees. The hearth's fire now crackles to life as she adds slender twigs to the embers, coaxing the flame to steady brightness. Steam rises from the clay kettle, and she lifts its lid to let a curl of fragrant warmth brush her face. She sprinkles a handful of crushed soapwort roots into the steaming water, the aroma of earth and blossoms unfolding in a faint swirl of steam. With a small wooden spoon she stirs the infusion, watching how the tiny bubbles cling to its rim. In this moment, she feels the balance of all things, the cool stone, the smooth metal rim of her water jug, the supple curve of her wooden paddle, the sturdy fluted sides of her clay vats. Each has been gathered with intention, laid out in readiness for the chore ahead. Slowly, she stands and steps away from the mat, turning her gaze back to the river's gentle sweep. The current moves steadily past the clay banks, carrying with it the promise of cleansing. A pair of egrets lifts nearby, their wings brushing the water's surface before they rise to perch atop a fallen palm trunk. The laundress inhales deeply, savoring the misty sweetness of the ebbing tide. In the pale light of morning, she feels a quiet joy in the simplicity of her preparations, a deep satisfaction in knowing that each carefully chosen tool will play its part in transforming muddied cloth into radiant linen. Now, with every implement in place, she steps forward to gather the first handfuls of natron crystals and ash, ready to begin the true labor of the day. The unhurried rhythm of tool assembly has prepared her hands and mind, creating a calm sanctuary before the wash begins. As her fingertips brush the rim of the largest clay vat, she allows herself one final moment of reflection on the ancient craft she practices, a tradition passed from mother to daughter, woven into the very fibers of the linens she tends. In that thoughtful silence, the river's murmur, the crackle of fire, and the distant cry of birds become a gentle chorus, guiding her into the next chapter of her morning, harvesting the vital cleansing agent that will bring white to the grayest cloth and softness to the toughest weave. The sun's faint glow had barely touched the horizon when the laundress reached the marshy inlet. A gentle hush still lay over the water, broken only by the soft calls of herons winging overhead and the distant rustle of papyrus reeds. The air carried a light, brackish scent, a mixture of river silt and dew, while underfoot the mudflats stretched out in muted relief, half-buried mounds of clay and sand that waited for the tide to withdraw and reveal their hidden bounty. She paused at the edge of the furthermost shallow pool, setting down her woven basket and running her fingers along its coiled fibers. In one smooth motion, she rolled back her linen skirts above her knees and waded forward, bare feet sinking into the cool, yielding earth. Each step was deliberate and careful, her toes gripping the slick mud as she sought the firmer patches where natron crystals might lie. A gentle breeze fluttered across the inlet, lifting stray strands of her hair, and the sky above shifted from ink blue to soft violet. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened, water rippling, birds calling, and the faint crackle of sun-warmed clay splitting in the low humidity. When she opened them again, the mudflats gleamed, tiny prisms of mineral catching what little light the dawn afforded. With a small wooden scoop, its handle worn smooth from years of use, she knelt beside a shallow depression in the earth. There, just beneath the surface, lay clusters of irregular white crystals glinting in the half-light. She dipped the scoop into the mud and, using a gentle rocking motion, coaxed them free. Each crystal held a subtle translucence, as if encasing a sliver of moonlight from the previous night. She watched the patterns of light dancing across their rough facets, then transferred them to a low clay bowl that rested in the silt beside her. Slowly, the bowl filled with the uneven shapes, some broad and plate-like, others thin shards crisscrossing like skeletal leaves. When the vessel brimmed, she paused to brush away stray flecks of mud with the pad of her thumb, careful not to disturb the fragile clusters. The crystals were a gift from the desert winds, ancient deposits carried by the ebbing waters and left behind to our kind care. A sudden splash ahead drew her gaze. A long-legged ibis had stepped into a nearby pool, its curved beak probing for small invertebrates. For a heartbeat, their worlds intersected, bird and woman both drawn to the same lagoon edge, each in silent pursuit of sustenance. The ibis lifted its head, flicked a droplet of water from its jaw, and drifted away with graceful patience. The laundress, too, continued, mindful that her work was not merely utilitarian but woven into the delicate balance of this riverine realm. Once the clay bowl held its full measure of crystals, she rose to her feet, cupping her hands to catch the shallow pool's rippling surface. She let the water sluice through her fingers, drawing away loose mud without dissolving the natron itself. The crystals danced in the palm of her hand, pearly and firm. She repeated the motion, tilting her head toward the faint pink of dawn and letting droplets fall back into the inlet with soft pings against the stones below. Nearby, a second, deeper basin had formed where the current pulled against the bank. She stepped over, perched on a moss-lined rock, and poured a handful of crystals into the clear water. Gentle currents swirled them, carrying away the last traces of earth. Tiny beads of silt floated outward in opaque clouds, leaving behind pristine fragments that gleamed like fresh snow in winter. Patiently, she retrieved them with the scoop and placed them into a coarser basket, a roomy sack woven from palm fibers. The basket's sides bulged as more crystals joined the growing heap. She adjusted its position on her shoulder, testing its weight. It was not heavy, yet enough to remind her of the labor ahead. Deep within the basket, filaments of papyrus and reed kept the crystals from clumping, while small openings in the weave let any remaining moisture drain away. The salt-like powder would remain dry, ready to whiten the heaviest linen or to soften even the coarsest flax. In the gentle haze of morning, she moved along the line of flats, repeating these careful steps. Here, the concentration of white clusters was greatest, forming irregular patches across the mud's burnished surface. With attentive hands and an experienced eye, she harvested each vein of mineral, taking just enough to fill her containers without disturbing the living bed beneath. Occasionally, she sank too deeply into an unseen pocket, the world tilting as her skirts dipped into the ooze. She laughed softly at herself, steadying her balance and pressing forward as a heron lifted off with a startled cackle. Sunlight spread in slow arcs across the sky, brightening the pool rims and setting the high reeds aflame with gold. Dust motes floated above the flats, drifting in circular eddies before surrendering to the breeze. Watching this measured dance, she recognized the interdependence of all elements, water giving passage to crystals, wind sculpting the marsh, and human hands bringing it to purpose. At last, her baskets were nearly full. The coiled palm sack brimmed with gleaming fragments, the clay bowl, now emptied and rinsed, lay upside down to drain. She gathered her tools, scoop, basket, and bowl, cradling them in one arm as she turned toward firmer ground. Over her shoulder, the inlet glowed behind her, a tapestry of mother-of-pearl and jade obscured by the morning haze. Before moving on, she paused at the water's edge. Kneeling, she scooped up the last handful of crystals left in the basin and held them aloft. The moment felt sacred, salt-born of endless tides, destined to cleanse and renew. She whispered an offering of gratitude, to the Nile, the desert, and the unseen spirits of the marsh. Then she emptied the crystals into a larger jar, sealing its neck with a strip of linen and tying it tight with strips of palmetto leaf. Standing at last on solid earth, the laundress brushed flecks of clay from her skirts. Her baskets of natron glittered like silent moons in the new daylight. Behind her, river and marsh continued their timeless dialogue, heedless of human labors. Ahead lay the hearth and the clay vats, where these mined crystals would meet ash, soapwort, and warm water to become the alkaline brew so essential to her art. Slowly she turned and made her way back along the sandy track, each step imprinting one small prayer of thanks. Chapter 4 was complete, the natron crystals gathered, rinsed, and tucked away. The ritual of harvest had ended, but the day's work would deepen still. Soon the alkaline mixture would bubble and shimmer, and the linens of every household would emerge glistening pure and bright, whiter than the dawn itself. A pale light filters through the sedge and cattails that fringe the Nile's edge. After delicate hands have already harvested the whiteness of natron crystals from the mud flats and rinsed them in shallow pools, the laundress moves quietly along the riverbank in search of the next essential ingredients. The soft hiss of the current undercuts each footstep as she follows narrow channels of water that still bear traces of last night's moonlight. Between the clumps of tall reeds, the waxy green leaves of soapwort rise on slender stalks, their pale blossoms tucked close to the surface. Nearby, the embers of her early hearth blaze no more, but the fire's memory remains in the charcoal black ash scattered at its base. She pauses beside a stand of soapwort, breathing in the faint scent of river dew and chlorophyll. With practiced grace, she draws a small wooden blade from her woven basket. Its handle is smoothed by years of use, the carved grooves tracing the curve of her palm. She slices through the soft earth around the root, careful not to bruise the precious tuber. As the knife breaks the soil, the root buds loosen and yield to her gentle pressure. She slips one hand beneath a mossy clump of dark earth and lifts the tangle of soapwort into her lap. Fine strands of root twist through the mud, their pale flesh hidden for months beneath floodwaters. Taking the bundle in both hands, she taps the mass lightly against a stone to dislodge the cling-ing silt. Dark flecks fall away like tiny grains of history, revealing the pale, almost translucent root. She fusses tenderly over each stalk, plucking away any torn leaves or stubborn bits of clay. When the roots are clean enough to work with, she sets them in a shallow bowl of clear Nile water. The tubers slip and undulate in the stream, as if delighted to be freed from the earth. Gently, she moves each piece through the water with repeated dips and swishes, coaxing out hidden particles until the liquid runs clear. A soft breeze picks up from upriver, rustling the tops of the reeds and carrying the tang of river salt. The laundress stands and shakes the excess water from her skirt. She lifts the bowl of rinsed roots and returns to the hearth's still warm stones. The remains of last night's fire lie in a shallow pit of clay, gray ash mingled with dark flakes of charcoal. With one graceful scoop of her hand, she gathers ash into a leather pouch. The fine powder drifts through her fingers in a gentle shower, each tiny fragment a gift of sun-ripened wood from yesterday's blaze. She finds a large, flat limestone slab nearby, one used for grinding pigments and stones for many seasons, and sets the bowl of roots upon it. Then she empties the pouch of ash against the same surface. Taking a smaller stone, she begins to crush and grind the ash in smooth, circular movements. With each turn, fragments of porous tinder reduce to a whisper of powder. The movement is so soft it might be a meditation, hands pressing, tilting, and coaxing the ash into a uniformly fine dust. Every so often she pauses, lifts a pinch of powder to her lips, and feels the grainy texture between thumb and forefinger. A dusty breath of earthiness drifts to her senses. Nearby, the bowl of soapwort roots bubbles in its shallow bed of water. She reaches for a narrow reed and stirs the roots, loosening any trapped sediment. Then she tilts the bowl to pour the lightly muddied water away, like a gentle rinse. The exposed roots rest bright and clean against the pale clay of the bowl. She uses her blade again to slice them into shorter segments, each piece revealing its fibrous core. In these cut edges, a faint milky liquid oozes, promising a lathering secret known to laundrywomen across generations. Setting the root pieces aside, she returns to the crushed ash on the slab. She scoops a handful of the powder into a small clay jar, its walls etched with simple lines to show the level of ingredients within. Next, she adds the soapwort slices, arranging them in concentric rings against the jar's inner sides. Finally, she spoons a measure of natron crystals, harvested just moments before, over the top. The crystals gleam like pale tears in flickering light, perched atop the layered ash and tender roots. With deliberate care, she seals the jar's narrow mouth with a disc of papyrus bark, bound by a thin reed string soaked in water. Tapping the lid gently, she hears a hollow note as air shifts within. Then she tilts the vessel and rolls it across the mat beside her, the layers mixing in a silent dance. Back and forth, over and over, until the ingredients meld into a fragrant, coarse powder, part alkali from the natron, part soot and ash, part vegetable stock from the soapwort. Inside the jar, an earthy fragrance gathers, a faint sweetness from the roots, a deep charcoal note from the ash, and a whisper of mineral salt from the natron. The laundress uncovers the jar for a moment and inhales lightly through her nostrils, anchoring the scent in her memory. She breathes out with a small, contented sigh. These scents, harvested from riverbank and hearth, will be the heart of her cleansing brew. She stands, balancing the jar in one hand and the bowl of water-carved roots in the other. The gentle hum of the Nile pulses through the morning air, companion to her slow, deliberate steps. Each step carries her closer to the large ceramic vat waiting beyond the reeds, where these humble elements will be transformed by warm water and gentle stirring into the alkaline bath that brightens every thread of linen. Before she moves on, she kneels once more by the ash pit. Her hand hovers over the remains of charcoal and earth, as if to acknowledge the fire that yielded this ash. With a soft, reverent pat, she scatters a tiny pinch of powder back onto the pit, returning some measure of its spirit to the ground. Then she rises, lifts her tools, and crosses the thin ribbon of sand toward the wide ceramic vat that awaits. In the calm of early morning, with the sun still low and the river slow, the careful alchemy of ash, soapwort, and natron stands ready to begin its next chapter. Each element, root, mineral, ember, carries the memory of place and purpose, the river's gift, the hearth's warmth, and the earth's mineral heart. As she lifts a ladle of cool Nile water into the waiting mixture, the scene settles into a hushed expectancy. The stage is set for the brew that will seep into every fiber of cloth and bring ancient linens back to brilliant, gleaming life. Thus ends the quiet harvest of Chapter 5, where the laundress, like a keeper of domestic secrets, gathers the natural bounty of her land. Ahead lies the melding of her labor with water and time, the slow unveiling of clean linen, and the gentle rhythm of each sunlit moment upon the Nile. Before the sun fully climbs above the eastern horizon, the laundress returns to her riverbank hearth with arms laden by the morning's harvest. Beside the hearth, a single, deep clay vat rests upon a bed of heated stones whose embers still glow faintly from the hearth's last offering of warmth. Dawn's pale light washes across smooth banks of clay and sand, revealing the vat's weathered surface, pitted here and there by seasons of use. In this hush before the world stirs, she moves with deliberate slowness, each breath attuned to the rhythmic sigh of the Nile just beyond. Gently, she lifts a smaller jug, fashioned from the same red Nile clay, and holds it near her cheek, feeling the cool surface against her fingertips. From this vessel, earlier water, warmed overnight by the hearth's still smoldering stones, is drawn in careful measure. The laundress steps close to the vat and, with a steady hand, begins to pour. The first ribbon of warm liquid arcs through the air, landing with a soft sigh against the vat's inner wall. Faint plumes of steam rise and swirl in the morning chill, they drift upward, carrying the river's mist and mingling with the first rays of sunlight. Next she reaches for the sack of natron crystals, collected only moments before from the mudflats at low tide. The sack's woven fibers whisper as she unties its neck, and a small cascade of pale, glassy grains spills into her palm. Each crystal glistens like chipped quartz. She releases them into the water, listening as they strike the surface with muted taps, then sink into the depths. The water darkens just slightly, acquiring an opalescent sheen as the natron dissolves. She tilts her head, inclining her ear to catch the soft clicking of crystals dissolving one by one against the clay interior. While the water still ripples faintly, she turns toward her jar of ash, the residue of last night's hearth fire. The ash is ashen gray, powdery but with larger flakes of charcoal interspersed like fragments of night itself. She scoops a handful with her fingers, feeling the fine dust sift between them. As she adds it to the vat, the powder floats briefly before settling, sending small eddies across the surface. Now the liquid bears a pale cloudiness, enriched by the ash's alkaline bite. This simple fusion of river water, natron, and ash will become the heart of her cleansing brew. She pauses, inhaling deeply. The resulting aroma is earthy, metallic in its sharpness, tempered by a hollow smokiness. It reminds her of clay walls drying in the sun, of pottery once shaped by her own hands, and of the river's pale undertow hidden beneath its surface calm. In this moment she breathes in history itself, the rhythm of generations who have used this very mixture, following the same ancient ritual, trusting its power to restore linen to soft, gleaming whiteness. Reaching beside the vat, she lifts a finely carved wooden paddle, its handle smoothed by decades of stirrings. She dips the tool into the cloudy brew, the paddle's flat surface vanishing to mid-length in swirling water. With a slow, circular motion she stirs, first clockwise, then counterclockwise. The motion is unhurried, each rotation releasing tiny rivulets of foam that gather at the edges. As she stirs, the mixture grows more lustrous, dissolved crystals catch the light in fleeting sparkles. Small bubbles form along the paddle's edge, then drift upward, popping softly at the water's surface. When the paddle comes free, tiny droplets flick off its end and collide with the vat's rim in precise, staccato taps. She sets the paddle aside and stirs once more by hand, swirling 5 fingers through the liquid until her palm feels its gentle resistance. The water is warm but not scalding, comforting against her skin. She kneads her fingers into the churned liquid, distributing every particle of ash and natron until nothing remains undissolved. The brew now holds the consistency of faintly opaque milk, settled but alive with bubbling currents. From a small clay bowl she retrieves the steeped soapwort infusion prepared at first light. The infusion is pale yellow, perfumed with fresh green notes, and carries a faint sweetness that contrasts with the harsher scent of ash. Gently, she pours the herbal liquid into the vat, and instantly a soft, pearly froth paddles at the surface. She watches the foam spread in gentle ribbons, like clouds drifting across a sunlit sky. Without haste, she takes up the paddle again, folding the herbal froth into the alkaline mixture until it is uniformly paled, with streaks of foam that gleam like the wings of waterfowl. As she works, her mind drifts to the rhythms of the day ahead. Soon she will sort fabrics by weight and color, plunge them into this very brew, coaxing centuries of embedded dust and soil from their fibers. Here, in the quiet dawn, she honors each garment's journey from hearth to river and back again. She recalls the heavy linen tunics of harvesters and the fineness of priestly cloaks, each piece deserving the same care. The mingled scents, the gentle sweetness of soapwort, the mineral sharpness of natron, the smoky undertone of ash, fill her senses. She closes her eyes for a moment, cradling her hands over the vat's rim as if offering thanks to the river itself. A light breeze rises, teasing ripples across the brew's surface and carrying the aroma inland, past the clustered reeds and slender palm trunks that frame her workspace. With measured confidence, she lifts the paddle one final time and tests the brew's temperature and texture. The mixture is barely warm now, perfectly balanced for fabric immersion. Tiny bubbles cling to the paddle's shaft, evidence that her stirring has incorporated air and prepared the solution to cling to linen fibers. Satisfied, she presses her palm flat on the paddle's handle, listening to the last hum of steam as it escapes into dawn. The alkaline brew is ready. In a slow, ritual gesture, she arranges the tools beside the vat, the jug for future warming, the bowl now emptied of soapwort, the wooden paddle, and a basket of small stone weights used to hold cloth submerged. Each item lies at hand, a testament to countless days of practice and refinement. Ahead of her, the clay vat gleams softly in the earliest sunlight, promising transformation. Silence falls once more, broken only by the distant murmur of the Nile and the song of waterbirds awakening on hidden river isles. For a long moment she simply stands, gazing into the vat as gentle light filters through the rising steam, creating dancing patterns on the brew's surface. In this quiet, she feels the pulse of time, ancient cycles of water, earth, and human hands. At last, the laundress steps back. The alkaline brew awaits its next companions, the fine linens, the coarser tunics, the countless fragments of daily life in ancient Egypt. In this luminous prelude, all is calm, all is ready. And though the day's labor is only beginning, she carries in her heart the knowledge that this carefully blended mixture holds the power to restore, to refresh, to renew. As the sun crawls higher, she bends once more toward the clay vat, prepared to guide each piece of cloth through the river's gift, one gentle swish at a time. A pale veil of light drapes itself over the riverbank, softening the clay-rich soil beneath the laundress's bare feet. The world still rests between night's cool hush and the day's awakening warmth, and she moves with deliberate slowness, as though each step might shatter the fragile calm. Along the water's edge, the large clay vats of alkaline brew stand at attention, their pale surfaces mottled with streaks of dried natron and ash. Nearby, woven baskets lie ready, their handles looped over low wooden stakes driven into the sand. Now, before the first submersion, comes the careful sorting of the laundry, an unhurried ritual of touch and sight that prepares each garment for the wash to come. She kneels beside a basket filled with linen tunics and wraps, hands reaching in to lift the first item. The fabric feels cool and slightly damp from the dawn mist, and she presses it gently between her palms. A faint pattern of raised weave greets her fingertips. This is the finest cloth of the day's load, spun from the softest flax and reserved for those who keep to the inner courts of the temple. She places it in a pale sack marked with ochre dye, two simple strokes that signify fine white linen. The sack closes with a twisted cord, and she sets it aside, airborne threads drifting in the still air. From a neighboring basket, she draws a coarser tunic, its threads a shade darker, flecked here and there with spots of dried mud. She shakes it once, softly, and the looser fibers rustle. Under the rising light, tiny grains of dried silk shimmer like minute stars. She holds the garment up to the sky, careful to catch each segment of stray soil in her mind's eye. Then, with measured patience, she pats it along the sleeves and hem, feeling for thicker patches that signal where the soiling clings most stubbornly. This piece will need extra treatment, a longer soak, perhaps an additional turn of the wooden paddle during scrubbing. She folds it with care, smoothing back the rough edges, and lays it into a second basket designated by a single wavy line in burnt umber, meaning heavily soiled. Next comes a linen shawl stained with oil from spilled date syrup, the russet patch so vivid against pale cloth it might have been painted. She holds it at arm's length, fingers lightly tracing the boundary between clean and stained. The oil has settled into the fibers, and she knows this shawl will require special attention, a targeted paste of concentrated natron and ash, worked gently into the fabric before its bath. With that thought, she lays it atop a flat stone slab, then reaches for a small wooden paddle to smooth it into gentle creases. It is folded not in haste but in reverence for the craft. Linen carries the weight of centuries, its purity a symbol of order against the chaos of sand and sweat. The laundress pauses, breathing in the faint aroma of her sorting, earthy ash mingled with the slightly sweet hint of soapwort lingering on her fingers. A trio of plump sparrows wing by, dipping low to peck at scattered grains of natron that had spilled from an overturned jar at dawn. Their twittering seems to bless the task, and for a moment, time slows even further. She straightens, brushing dust from her linen kilt, and turns her attention to the last pile, the everyday tunics, the common wraps that have borne the journey from village homes to the river's edge. They are of medium weight, neither the delicate finery of temple servants nor the thick coarse cloth of field workers, but something in between, everyday garments that hold a little soil, a little sweat, a little story. Pulling one such tunic from the basket, she loosens its folds and lifts it aside the current, letting the gentle breeze tease its edges. The morning air carries the scent of the Nile, fresh water, mossy banks, and hints of riverweed. She runs her hand across the chest, then along a sleeve, watching as a single grain of sand tumbles from the weave and settles on the sand. Even this simple act becomes a meditation, each grain of sand a reminder of the endless flow of the river, each thread of linen a testament to the labor of countless hands that harvested flax along the delta. She folds the tunic and places it beside the others in a third basket, marked by two parallel lines of red ochre, the code for lightly soiled. By now the sun has climbed higher, turning dawn's pale canvas into a warmer gold. The edges of the clay vats catch this light, glowing faintly, as though the mixture within were itself an animate, breathing thing. She stands, brushes away stray fibers from her apron, and surveys her work. Before her, 3 neat compartments hold the day's laundry, the finest, the heavily soiled, the ordinary. Each pile is folded with the same steady care, but each will follow its own journey through the soaps and scrubs that await. With a small wooden spoon, she dips a measure of alkaline brew from the nearest vat, lifts it to her nose, and inhales the earthy bouquet, natron's dry crispness, ash's subtle smokiness, and the herbaceous trace of soapwort. The heady scent draws her back into the moment, reminding her of all that has come before, the early gathering of ingredients, the tending of fire, the mixing of solutions. Now, it is time for the laundry itself to enter that quiet world of water and stone, where each garment will be coaxed clean by centuries-old practice. Still, she pauses once more. Leaning over the low mat where her tools rest, she touches each in turn, the smooth limestone scraping slab, the slender wooden paddles, the willow baskets. Each belongs to her daily ritual, each bears the marks of use, tiny chips along an edge, a faint groove in the wood where her fingers always rest. In this moment of stillness, she offers a silent thanks to her ancestors, to the river, and to the linen that will soon emerge single and bright. The sorting is complete. The world seems to hold its breath. A final glance at the 3 piles sealed in their baskets, and she steps toward the vats. The sorted garments will now enter the next phase, their first gentle submersion. Under her foot, the sand yields softly, and the river's distant murmur seems to swell, as if encouraging the transformation about to begin. Carefully, she positions the basket of fine linen beside the largest vat, its frothy top gleaming in the sunlight. With calm purpose, she unties the cord and lifts the cloth into her arms, ready to introduce it to the cleansing brew. Thus ends the quiet ceremony of sorting, a slow, reverent choreography of touch and sight. From here, each item will deepen into the water, each fiber will release its burden of dust and shadow. The laundress, her heart steady and her senses attuned, guides the garments toward that first plunge. And as linen meets water, the soft hiss of the wash begins, the gentle prelude to the next unfolding chapter of wash day on the Nile. A gentle hush settles along the riverbank as the sun rises higher, its golden fingers stretching across the murmuring water. The clay vats, heavy with the pale froth of the alkaline brew, sit waiting on the sand, their rims kissed by early light. In this quiet hour, the laundress moves with steady purpose. Each piece of fine linen, folded into soft, milky white bundles, carries the promise of renewed brightness, yet for now, it lies silent in her arms, patient and still. She selects the first garment, a slender length of sheer linen, harvested from flax grown along the delta, woven so delicately that dawn breezes thread themselves through its weave. Brushing her fingertips over the fabric, she feels the whisper of each fiber, hears in her mind the distant rustle of stalks in summer fields. A faint trace of last season's flax oil lingers, a memory she will soon wash away. With reverent care, she draws the cloth out until it unfurls fully, its folds floating like a ghostly bird upon the clay-scored sand. Bending low, she cups her palm and lifts a small scoop of the frothy liquid, letting it stream back into the vat. The wash brew, softly effervescing with natron and ash, emits a muted hiss as air escapes its caustic depths. Tiny bubbles race along her skin before bursting, each one freeing a whisper of the ancient river's essence. She closes her eyes and breathes in the rich, earthy aroma, the scent of warming clay, the faint tang of mineral salt, and the quiet spice of crushed soapwort. It is the very lifeblood of cleanliness in this world that she knows so well. The laundress steadies the linen's edge and lowers it, bit by bit, into the froth. The cloth meets the alkaline water with a soft sigh, submerging slowly as if deciding how deeply it will sink. Ripples fan outward, touching the edge of the vat in widening circles that catch flecks of morning light. She watches how tendrils of tiny bubbles form along the surface of the threads, clustering in delicate filaments before dissipating, leaving the fabric sitting pale and luminous beneath the liquid's gentle weight. Hands poised at the rim, she begins the first dance of agitation. With deliberate slowness, she lifts the cloth again, allowing bottle's green-streaked liquid to run through its weave before pressing it back down. Water glides between her fingers, cool against her warm skin, carrying away last night's dust and the soft traces of body oils. Each raise and lower stirs the pot into a muted symphony, the swelling creak of clay, the soft gurgle of liquid, the whisper of linen parting from itself. It is a ritual older than memory, practiced along this same stretch of Nile for countless generations. As the fine threads breathe in the wash, hard-edged stains begin to yield. A pale shoulder seam, once tinged with the ochre of dust and the residue of palm wine, shows the faintest flicker of revival. She pauses to peer closely, tilting the cloth toward the light. Through the glassy surface, she can see the stubborn pigments lifting away, carried off by the alkaline flow. A small smile touches her lips, the fabric's first sigh of relief warms her spirit. Stepping back, she allows the linen to settle. The surface of the liquid glows now with tiny flickers of sun, and she imagines the bubbles rising slowly, each liberating a captured mote of soil. Near her feet, a second vat awaits, a coarser mixture, prepared for tunics and rough-spun garments. She catches the sound of birdsong drifting over the water, red ibis calling, the gentle trill of wagtails, and for a moment, her mind floats beyond the task, drifting with the currents of memory and half-forgotten dreams. Then she returns to the fine linen. She lifts it one more time, this time drawing the cloth in gentle spirals. With each turn, the weave fans out, touching fresh patches of the brew. From this close, she hears the cloth exhale, a tiny hiss as air escapes from thread channels, releasing pockets that held yesterday's atmosphere. The sensation reminds her of breathing herself, of the shared life woven into every garment. These threads have kept someone cool beneath the noon sun, have sheltered a child at night, have brushed against skin as prayers were spoken in shadowed temple halls. Now they drink deeply, purifying themselves in the river's silent grace. Again, she lowers the linen fully. Now the bath is quiet, no hiss, no swirl, only the gentle slow glide of fabric settling into place. It floats, ethereal as smoke in a still room, and she watches bubbles coalesce along the fold of a hem, picking out its contour like a string of pearls. Her fingers twitch with anticipation as she readies to extract the cloth, but she waits. Patience is part of the ritual. The brew must seep into every fiber, coaxing out the last trace of impurity. Moments pass, though time here is unmeasured by hours. The sun climbs steadily in the sky, casting low beams that filter through wisps of cloud and tremble on the water's surface. The sweetness of lotus petals from yesterday's aromatic rinse still lingers in her thoughts, and she wonders how this first sojourn in natron will shape the linen's final luminance. Already she senses a transformation, a softening of rough edges, a smoothing of cores, a whisper of new life breathed back into worn fabric. When at last she decides the moment is right, she draws the linen skyward. The liquid races down like rain from the cloth's open weave, and her hair, caught by a stray splash, glistens in the light. She drapes the now heavy fabric over the rim of the vat, allowing it to shiver and settle, each movement releasing a gentle plume of steam into the cool air. Stray droplets illuminate like captured stars before they fall, blotting pale circles on the sand. With soft deliberation, she transfers the linen to the neighboring vat if it has stubborn spots, or else to the shallow pool she has prepared for its first rinse. But before she moves on, she pauses once more, fingertips tracing the wet folds. She can feel the promise of brightness beneath her touch, the subtle resilience that will carry this garment through another day of life on the Nile's edge. And in that quiet moment, she offers gratitude, to the ancient river that lends its waters, to the crystals of natron born in far-off deserts, and to the simple thread that binds them all. In the gentle hush that follows, she stands poised between what has been and what will be. The first submersion is complete, a silent covenant of renewal laid down in soup-green liquid and the light of morning. Ahead, the next chapters await: agitation, scrubbing, multiple rinses, sun-bleaching, and each step will carry her deeper into this timeless dance. But for now, the cloth rests, and so does she, breathing in the subtle hush that falls after the first plunge, content in the knowledge that transformation has already begun. A gentle warmth now begins to creak into the morning air as the sun lifts itself higher above the horizon, spilling palest gold across the broad face of the Nile. The laundress pauses at the edge of her low, clay-lined vat, where the first submersion of fine linen has changed the surface to a quivering bronze. Here, in this small curved basin of water and natron, ash, and soapwort brew, she prepares for the most meditative portion of her work, the rhythmic agitation that teases out dirt and ancient oils from soft flax fibers. The world beyond the riverbank remains hushed, as though waiting for her gentle movements to stir the day fully awake. She begins with the lightest pieces, the sheer white kerchiefs and slender sashes folded into a neat pile at her side. Lifting the topmost scarf between both hands, she draws it above her head, watching beads of the turbid liquid drip like molten silver down its length. For a moment she holds it aloft, studying the subtle play of damp fabric against the rising sunlight. Then, in one fluid motion, she lets the cloth sink into the bath. A soft sigh of water follows, a hollow swish that echoes through the hush. The linen swirls beneath her fingers, and she closes her eyes, listening to the gentle hiss as tiny air bubbles slip from the folds. The motion repeats: lift, pause, sink. With every cycle, the scouring solution seeps deeper between the threads. The laundress finds a calm rhythm to her body. Her back straightens. Her shoulders shift, her arms rise and fall in measured beats. The water sloshes against the clay rim of the vat, sounding like distant rain. In this slow, deliberate dance, the linen sheds traces of earlier days, the faint rust of pollen, the whisper of oil from cooking lamps, the pale tracks of soil trodden on dusty pathways. Each dip and rise washes away the detritus of life lived under an unyielding sun. After 3 rotations, the cloth feels noticeably lighter in her grasp. She flings it outward, and it arcs briefly over the lip of the vat before splashing back into the deeper center. Droplets ping softly off the ceramic edges. She extends her fingers, catching a cluster of glistening beads, tracing their tiny arcs as they return to the swirling amber liquid. The tactile imprint of the linen between her thumbs and forefingers is both reassuring and purposeful. She can sense where the solution has not yet reached, the fabric's stubborn spots still holding a faint gray trace against the white. It is time to move to the heavier items. She pauses to adjust the low stool beside her, pushing it into the soft sand so that each turn of her body is comfortable, each rise of her arms unhurried. She reaches for a sturdy tunic woven from coarser threads of domesticated flax. It comes weighted with the soil of yesterday's market, smeared with dark smudges from wood-smoked hearths. She surveys the garment, her eyes tracing the pattern of stains with quiet care. Then she ducks her head, immersing the folded edges into the foaming mixture, and begins again her ritual of pour and press, lift and lower. Here, the cloth resists. It drags against her arms, hung heavy with particles that cling stubbornly in the weave. She leans closer, running the linen along her forearm to coax greater contact with the brine. The liquid meets the fabric's hollows, bubbling at the surface where it devours small flecks of dust. A fine mist of misted particles drifts between her hands, carried briefly by the gentle breeze whispering off the river. She inhales the faint, earthy tang of natron and ash, an aroma at once sharp and calming, then exhales, letting each motion guide her toward a steadier cadence. Time begins to slip between her fingers, measured in the rising rumble of the river beyond, in the distant caw of gulls circling low overhead, and in her own breathing. Each plunge of linen into the frothing water is like the slow stroke of an oar pulling against the current. She counts silently, 1 lift, 1 pause, 1 drop. 2 lift, 2 pause, 2 drop. At some point, the pattern feels less like counting and more like heartbeat. Her arms rise and fall unconsciously, eyes half closed in reverence to this simple communion of cloth, water, and sunlit breeze. To her left, a narrow wooden paddle rests across 2 small stone supports. It is used later for agitating larger bundles of laundry, but she prefers the intimacy of her own hands for these personal pieces. Still, she glances at it occasionally, remembering its use in earlier seasons, when entire folds of canvas had to be stirred aggressively. Today's wash, however, is a gentler affair. It is a ritual, a way to slow the mind before the scraping scrubs and sun bleaching that will follow. Already, she senses the linen softening its grip on old marks, the turbid water growing slightly clearer as flecks sink to the bottom. As the light pours fully across the valley, the water's surface in her vat dances like oil in a lantern flame. Patterns of sunlight ripple over the walls of her workspace. She pauses again, resting her hands on the rim of the vat, feeling its smooth curve beneath her palms. The warmth of the sun seeps into the clay, warming the solution within. She closes her eyes, allowing herself a moment's reflection. Each cloth she revives carries a story: the fine tunic of a scribe returning from the temple, the scarf of a merchant's daughter, the apron of a potter. Through these threads, she touches countless lives. The simplicity of her task belies its depth. She is the keeper of second chances, restoring fabrics to purity so they can be worn once more in marketplaces and palaces alike. Rejuvenated by that quiet reverie, she returns her attention to a pair of small swaddling bands, once wrapped around a newborn's arms. Their linen fibers are so fine they almost dissolve in the water's embrace. She lifts them, delicate as gossamer wings, and works them through the froth with the gentlest of pulses. The bubbles cling like sleepy motes of dew, then detach as she presses the cloth against her palm. She notices how the solution's viscosity shifts with each garment, thicker with ash, thinner with soapwort, richer with natron. By touch alone she discerns the blend, calibrating her effort to the task, gentle where the fibers are fine, firm where the cloth is coarser. After she has coaxed dirt from each piece, she sets them aside along the riverbank on a well-worn reed mat. Each wet item glistens in a neat row, awaiting the next chapter of its renewal: the scrubbing, the rinse, and the sun's precise bleaching glare. The rhythmic agitation has done its work. Stains have lifted. The bath has turned pale with sediment, leaving behind traces of yesterday's journey from dust to color. The laundress allows herself a small smile, pleased by the subtle gradations of progress. Finally, she stands and rinses her arms in the cooler water of the Nile itself, letting the last cling of the alkaline solution wash away. The current curls around her wrists and shins, a silky softness in contrast to the hearty tang of the clay vat. Tiny fish dart between her toes, curious and unafraid. She watches them vanish, then retrieves her wooden paddle. She will use it now to stir the larger bulk of coarser garments, pounding them gently in the bath to dislodge any remnants of grime. But for a few moments she simply savors this pause, the world balance between what has been cleansed and what still awaits its turn. In these quiet, purposeful movements of wash and rinse, the laundress finds her own moment of renewal. The methodical repetition clears the mind of all but the one task at hand. The Nile's chantings, its distant lapping, its gleaming flow, become a steady companion. The pale linen, pressed and folded at her side, promises new beginnings for both wearer and cloth. As she picks up the thicker tunics and shifts them into place for the paddle's even strokes, she feels the morning settle around her like a soft white sheet. In the hours to come, the river will carry away the soiled water. The sun will claim those damp linens in its gentle fire. And by day's end, each piece will emerge bright, supple, and ready for the world once more. Here, on the banks of the immortal Nile, the simple ritual of rhythmic agitation becomes an offering to time itself, a patient ceremony that lifts away yesterday's toil so that tomorrow's light may fall on unblemished cloth. And in that quiet, cleansing cadence, the laundress finds her peace. A soft pall of dawn still lingers along the riverbank as the laundress gathers her strength for the next stage of her morning ritual. The rhythmic agitation of soaked linen has coaxed free much of the day's grime, but stubborn stains cling to the fabric fibers like memories in the mind. It is here, at the water's edge, that she places her smooth limestone scrubbing slabs, flat surfaces hewn from the river's own banks, polished by centuries of water and sand, to wrest the final traces of soil from each hem and fold. She selects the first article of laundry, a length of finely woven linen, once the drape of a noblewoman's tunic, now mottled with tiny dark spots along its border. The cloth still bears the tang of the alkaline bath, scented faintly of ash and soapwort. It is damp and heavy in her hands. Kneeling beside her low clay vat, she reaches to the reed mat at her side and unrolls a small bundle of cleaning paste, a coarse combination of natron crystals, crushed soapwort roots, and residue from the hearth's white ash. The paste is stiff, earthy, its color a pale dove gray flecked with lighter grains that glint briefly as if holding hidden fire. Into the vat she dips the limestone slab, submerging its surface in the cool, silty water. When she lifts it, droplets run back toward the river in miniature rivulets, carrying away the last whispers of sediment. The slab is slick under her fingers but holds enough friction to grip the linen as it passes over. With a practiced motion, she scoops a small dollop of paste upon the damp stone and spreads it in a thin, even layer across half the slab. The paste adheres to the stone's surface, forming a gentle rise in the middle, ready to meet the stain. She draws the edge of the linen over the bed of paste, her fingers guiding it with deliberate care. The hem passes against the stone in slow, backward strokes, firm enough to coax out the stain but patient enough to preserve the delicate weave. Each pass of cloth over stone sends tiny droplets of cleansing water and paste arcing through the morning air, catching the first rays of sunlight like minuscule gems. The laundress breathes steadily, matching her heartbeat to the soft tap of fabric meeting stone. A song of motion unfolds, she presses, she draws the linen back, she lifts and turns the cloth, sliding fresh sections over the paste with exacting precision. Her hands are steady, fingers damp with the alkaline brew, nails trimmed short to avoid snagging the weave. She leans forward, gaze fixed on the pale gray line of the hem, watching the faint stain blur and loosen. Every so often she pauses, raises the slab to let excess water slip off its edge, and tilts it slightly so the spatter drains back into the Nile beyond, as though giving the stone back to the river that shaped it. The air is cool around her shoulders but warms at the small circle of sunlight that has crept down the bank. A gentle breeze stirs the reeds behind her, carrying distant calls of waterfowl. The laundress moves to her second slab, identical in size but bearing a smoother edge, polished by less time in the current. Across this slab she treats a tunic laced with ochre stains, traces of clay from a child's game or perhaps paint from a merchant's sign. She applies a fresh streak of paste and begins the same ritual of firm, rhythmic scrubbing. The paste gleams between the fabric's threads, filling the grooves until it almost looks like flour spread across dough. With each meticulous stroke, more of the ochre gives way, sliding off in tiny grains that wash into the waiting water. She places her palm flat against the linen, reassuring herself that the fibers remain intact, that the fabric is not worn thin. Her touch is tender and confident, as though she were coaxing a whisper from stone. A few stubborn flecks refuse to budge. She pauses to add a very thin trail of pure natron to the paste, intensifying its cleansing power. The increased alkali provokes stronger bubbles against the fabric, but she tames it with gentle pressure, scrubbing just hard enough to win the last flecks loose. As she works, she becomes aware of the comforting sounds around her, the almost inaudible hum of the current, the distant call of a heron lifting in flight, the gentle squeak of scrubbing stone. Time seems to slow, each motion is measured, each breath drawn in sync with the talismanic rhythm of her task. She is not merely cleaning cloth but tending to a trust placed in her hands, the garments of a household, the very names of its members woven into the hems and threads. Having freed the hem and collar, she dips the entire length of cloth into a shallow pool cut beside the riverbank, letting the clear Nile water rinse away every trace of paste. She lifts it high, watching the water sluice through the weave, carrying off the gray residue until the fabric runs clear and unblemished. The linen glows almost white beneath the sun's growing warmth. Next comes a coarser sackcloth bag, stained with dark streaks from barley husks, a tougher challenge. She spreads the bag across the final slab and confronts the broad swath of discoloration with vigor tempered by tenderness. Back and forth, she rubs the surface, generating a small froth of white alkaline water against stone. Droplets scatter, and one or two land on a nearby snail's shell, startling the creature into retreat. The laundress notices with a quiet smile before turning back to her work. At last, every piece has been coaxed across stone, freed of its worst blemishes and ready for the first rinse in the Nile's moving water. She stacks the slabs at the water's rim, still wet and glistening, and steps back to admire the row of cleaned garments. In the gentle hush of early morning, they hang as silent testaments to labor and care, their fibers renewed, their stories made blank again. She inhales deeply, inhaling the mix of river earth, wet limestone, and the pure linen's subtle sweetness. There is a calm satisfaction in this precise, physical rhythm, a grace found in the simplest acts of washing. With a final tilt of each slab to send its water home to the river, she places the stones on her reed mat, ready for the next stage of rinsing and sun-bleaching. And as the sun climbs higher, she rises too, her shoulders eased by the promise of fresh, clean cloth and the promise of another slow, perfect ritual unfolding on the Nile's timeless bank. A pale light has gathered above the quiet bend of the river by the time the laundress gathers her freshly scrubbed linens. In the moments since she set aside the limestone scrubbing slabs, the Nile's current has grown just perceptibly swifter, carrying with it the faint scent of riverweed and the whisper of distant reeds. Each piece of cloth, from the soft, almost transparent sheaths of fine linen to the coarser collars of everyday tunics, still glistens with droplets clinging to its fibers. She cradles a bundle of damp garments in her arms and slips bare feet into the warm, silty bank. The earth yields slightly beneath her toes, and for an instant she feels the pulse of the river beneath her, slow, steady, eternal. In this sheltered nook of the Nile, where tall papyrus stems lean across the water like slender sentinels, the laundress kneels and lowers the first length of linen into the clear current. The cloth submerges with a gentle sigh, releasing tiny ribbons of foam from the alkali soak. The foam drifts away downstream, scattering like pearlescent petals on glass. As she presses each hand against the wet fabric, she senses the softness returning to the thread, each fiber plumped by the pure river water after its long immersion in the sudsy brew. The sun, climbing steadily higher, sends shafts of light slanting through the papyrus, illuminating dancing particles in the water that momentarily cling to damp cloth before drifting off into deeper pools. Slowly, she lifts the cloth, holding it so that the current pours over every inch. Miniature rapids ripple across the fabric's surface, and any residual grime, faint smudges of mud, stubborn flecks from last night's hearth, gives way under the patient pressure of moving water. Where the soap once lingered as tiny white beads, now there is only the clean clarity of the Nile. She pats at a stubborn fold, her palms cupping water and guiding it through every layer. In the hush that surrounds her, broken only by the steady lap of lapping water, she listens to the gentle clap of the linen as it parts from her hands. Beneath her, the riverbed stones are polished smooth by centuries of immersion. If she shifts her weight, her toes find a cool pebble that glints hampered bronze beneath the current. Now and then, a small fish, startled by this sudden contact, darts out from under a submerged reed, brushing delicate scales against the cloth before vanishing around a curved stone. The laundress pauses to watch their quicksilver glint, as curious and fleeting as the bubbles that cling to the fresh-washed linen. Each darting flash reminds her of how life thrives even in these gentle shallows, sustained by the river that gives both water and ritual to her daily labor. She lowers the next piece of cloth, a heavier tunic still holding the memory of last evening's embers, and feels the current tug at the wet threads. The weight of the water through the fabric is a tender resistance, coaxing out the last traces of cleaning agents. As she agitates the linen with subtle motions, lifting, dropping, smoothing, the morning light catches the smooth flow of each movement. Tiny droplets leap free from the wet edge of the fabric, arcing sunlight like minute diamonds before falling silently back to the river. The sound is soft, rhythmic, an unhurried pulse that matches the beating of her heart. Inhaling deeply, she notes the crisp fragrance that now clings to the cloth, a mingling of river's green perfume and the faint sweetness of soapwort, mellowed by the clay in yesterday's ash. The aroma lingers around her, a gentle reminder of the compound she gathered, crushed, and steeped in her clay vats. Each scent, once sharp when freshly mixed, now has mellowed into something more intimate, a quiet echo of the morning's work. By rinsing here, at this very bend, she preserves that subtle perfume, allowing the Nile's pure water to lift away acrid traces and leave in its place a soft, sun-kissed note. When all the garments have passed through this first freshwater baptism, she sets them aside atop a flat stone near the river's edge. They lie there, heavy with moisture yet shorn of suds, their threads still clinging to one another in gentle folds. She straightens each piece with careful fingers, smoothing hems and aligning edges so that no crease escapes her attention. Every fold is deliberate, first the sleeves, then the body of the tunic, then the hem. Even in these simple gestures, there is grace, an echo of all the laundresses who came before her, washing by these same waters, under the same sun, following a ritual both humble and sacred. Before she turns to the next stage of her work, there is a moment of quiet reflection. She leans forward, dips her fingertips into the river once more, and whispers a silent thanks to the Nile, for its gift of water, its ever-renewing flow, the life it carries from distant highlands to these fertile banks. Around her, the riverbank stirs with gentle life, a heron lifts from a cluster of reeds, wings outstretched in slow, deliberate beat, a breeze stirs the papyrus, sending a soft rustle through the morning air. Overhead, the sun breaks fully free of dawn's shadow, illuminating the world in clear, golden clarity. These are the hours of transition, when the laundry moves from one element to the next, from the heated clay vats to the river's embrace, and soon to the cleansing touch of sunlight. The first rinse has done its part, washing away the heavy residues of soap and lifting the linen out of its alkaline bath. The next chapter will find these very garments stretched upon slender reeds, open to the sky and the slow, patient power of the sun. For now, the laundress breathes deeply, savoring the river's cool, gentle caress, and waits until every last wrinkle is relaxed and every last soap bubble dissolved. Then, gathering her folded cloth, she stands, her back straight, her mind quiet, and steps away from the water's edge toward the reeds that await the promise of natural bleaching and final drying under the coming day. In the soft light of mid-morning, at this unassuming bend in the Nile, the laundry has completed its first freshwater purification. Each garment now carries the subtle imprint of the river's clarity, a promise of brightness yet to come. The laundress tucks stray tendrils of hair behind her ear and sets her basket on the sun-warmed stone. Here, at the meeting of water and earth, she feels the slow enactment of traditions older than any man-made temple, a humble ceremony of cleansing and renewal, carried out in quiet reverence for the river that has nurtured her people for countless generations. And with that, she lifts the first bundle once more and moves toward the sunlit stretch of reeds, where linen will soon unfurl like pale wings in the breeze, white as the distant pieces of cloud drifting overhead. The sky has deepened from pale rose to the softest, clearest blue by the time our laundress turns her attention from the last gentle rinse to what will be the most luminous phase of her morning's work. She stands on a narrow tongue of riverbank, where the Nile's current parts to flow around a tangle of reeds and rushes, creating a stretch of shallow water smooth as polished glass. Here she has already arranged a simple scaffold of slender papyrus poles, their tops bound together with strips of reed fiber, forming a low frame over which the oars of sunlight can pass unhindered. Now, with deliberate calm, she lifts the first length of linen from its shallow basin and extends it slowly, letting a faint draft of wind tug at the loose folds. With practiced fingers, she pinches one corner of the damp cloth and secures it to a thin wooden peg, the rounded tip of the pin pressed firmly into the soft earth to hold the linen taut. Each peg she uses is carved from acacia and smoothed by hand until no splinter might catch the fine fabric. As she works, her arm moves in a deliberate arc, the linen unfolding like a pale sail against the vibrant sky. She pauses for a moment's reflection, close enough to feel the warmth of the sun spreading across her shoulders, and listens to the gentle murmur of the river slipping around the reeds below. Then she steps back and repeats the gesture on the opposite edge, drawing the cloth taut once more before anchoring it with another peg. The linen, still heavy with residual moisture, dips slightly in the middle, forming a soft curve that catches a dance of light across its surface. From this vantage, she can trace the faint ripples left by her fingers as she smoothed it earlier, subtle ridges in the weave glowing more brightly as the sun climbs higher. Gently, she adjusts each corner in turn, minding the tension so that no crease might set in the brightening fabric. Between one piece and the next, she walks barefoot across the warm sand and clay, her toes sinking in just enough to leave paired prints that speak of patience and care. At every step, the air feels charged with the promise of renewal, an ancient promise whispered in the unmoving air that carries the scent of papyrus and the distant lull of desert winds beyond the river's edge. The laundress places another fragment of linen atop the lower rods of the frame. This one has a faint stain near the hem, long since lifted but still leaving a ghost of discoloration, a trace of yesterday's work. She secures the corners as before, swelling the cloth into a soft rectangle that shines under the sun's gaze. As she presses the last peg into place, the fabric emits a soft sigh against the wind, a delicate snap that sounds almost like a breath. It is the cloth's own acknowledgement of the drying power of daylight and the culmination of every ritual, natron, ash, the scrub of stone, and the flowing purity of Nile water. From where she stands, she watches the transformed textiles shimmer between the slender posts. Small motes of dust dance through sunbeams, floating across the pale surfaces like tiny lanterns in a cathedral of light. She recalls the earliest mornings, centuries past, when her foremothers first laid out their linens in just such a manner, trusting in the sky's vast fire to lift the last shade of impurity from cloth. The practice carries a sacred weight, to be cleansed by sun and breezes, under the boundless dome of heaven, is to partake in a ritual older than memory. Her thoughts drift momentarily to the women who will wear these linens later in the day, priests in their alabaster sanctuaries, merchants in the bustle of the market, artisans pausing at midday to cool their foreheads against crisp collars. Each dress, each sash, will bear the quiet testimony of her hands and the Nile's generosity. Even the smallest undertunic, the thinnest swath of cloth wrapped at a child's waist, proclaims something of her devotion and of the land's enduring bounty. A gentle breeze rises, carrying a chirrup of reed warblers among the tall stalks by the water's edge. The reeds themselves lean into the current, nodding in silent agreement as the linen ripples back and forth. Light filters through the fine weave, tiny squares of shadow and brilliance that seem to form shifting patterns across the ground. She steps closer, reaching out to trace one of these luminous patterns with a fingertip, feeling the warmth of the cotton radiate upward, as if the cloth itself has stored the sun's heat and now offers it back to her palm. She straightens slowly and surveys the scene from left to right, gauging the evenness of each stretch. Here, one piece shares a slight fold near its center, a crease that might set if left unattended. With gentle care, she unpins the corner and releases the linen into her lap for a moment, smoothing it against her thighs until every thread realigns. Then she reattaches it, discovering a new balance between tension and ease that allows the cloth to warm uniformly. Across the field of sunlit fabric, the day so far has been rendered luminous, a tapestry of ivory and cream, a pause between river's lap and sky's expanse. The laundress lingers for a time in silent witness, watching how each panel breathes in the light. As the hours pass, the drying will reach its final stage, each fold will stiffen just enough to hold a crease, yet remain supple under the fingers of those who will fold these linens into neat parcels later on. She knows that within an hour or two, the bleaching effect of the intense Egyptian sun will have filled every fiber with clarity, banishing the faintest shadow of dirt. In this sacred interlude, she allows her thoughts to wander to the next tasks. Soon she will remove the pegs, gathering each piece with the turning of her palms to avoid wrinkling. Then will come the final beating upon a gentle bench of wood, the wringing to expel every remnant of moisture, the folding into precise rectangles, and the final passage of sweet almond oil across smooth surfaces to seal in the memory of cleansing. But for now, the sun stands highest in her domain, and these pale slabs of linen hang like flags of quiet triumph under the endless Egyptian sky. Birdsong drifts in from the river's edge, and the slow ripple of breeze carries a whiff of lotus from the opposite bank. The laundress breathes deeply, letting the sensation of warmth and light fill her chest. A profound calm settles in her bones, as though she, too, is being sun-bleached free of yesterday's residue, every thought, every tension softened beneath the sky's broad eye. She closes her eyes, just for a moment, and offers a silent prayer of thanks to the Nile, for water that flows without fail, for sunlight that purifies without violence, and for the gentle labor that links her to generations whose hands have folded and smoothed and set their linens to the wind. Then she opens her eyes and, with a final glance of contented satisfaction, turns toward the shaded grove beyond the reeds. There, beneath the fronds of a lone date palm, her next pause will await, the rest of noon, and the quiet reflection that follows. Yet even as she walks away, the pale banners of linen continue their vigil, suspended between earth and sky, waiting for the moment when she will return to restore them to their final shape, garments worthy of new beginnings, cleansed by ancient ritual, and ready once more to cradle human skin beneath the brilliance of Egypt's ever-watchful sun. A broad palm tree stretches its feathery fronds above the riverbank, casting dappled shadows across the warm sand. The midday sun hangs high in a pale blue sky, its light softer here beneath the verdant canopy. The laundress, whose arms have moved in careful rhythm since before first light, pauses at last. She settles on a low, flat stone, one whose surface is warmed but not too hot to the touch. Around her, the day's labors lie waiting, lengthening rows of pale linen flutter on slender reeds, clay vats stand half-empty where they've been drained for the noon respite, and beside her, neatly stacked tools of wood, stone, and woven reed bask in the soft hush of rest. Reaching for a carved alabaster flask, she lifts it with deliberate slowness. The vessel is cool against her palm, its swirls of pale cream and ochre catching what sunlight filters through the palm leaves above. She tilts it up and an amber stream of water spills over her lips, tasting faintly of the river's depths. Each drop feels precious, water collected before dawn, drawn from a quiet eddy where the current moves slow and sure. As she drinks, she lets her shoulders loosen and her breath lengthen. The lingering scent of ash and soapwort, still clinging to her hands, fades as the fresh, mineral tang of Nile water washes over her senses. Around the stone seat, the world is alive with soft murmurs. A breeze stirs the palm fronds in spirals of light and shadow, a pair of white herons alight on a distant bank, their wings murmuring against the blue. Beneath her feet, the sand shifts as tiny crabs dart between sunlit grains. In the distance, the faint lap of the river against clay-lined banks drifts upward, a liquid lullaby to steady her thoughts. She closes her eyes for a heartbeat and listens, to the soft hum of cicadas dancing in the date palms, to the hollow echo of her own steady breathing, to the muted susurrus of linen whispering on the reeds. As she reopens her eyes, she allows her mind to wander back through the morning's rituals. She recalls the hush of pre-dawn, when she first set foot on this bank and felt the chill of wet sand beneath her toes. She remembers the crackle of the morning hearth, the scent of burning reed that coaxed warmth into heavy clay pots, the coarse limestone slab that yielded stubborn stains beneath her palm. In her mind's eye, she traces every step, gathering smooth stones from the riverbed, dredging natron crystals from mudflats, uprooting soapwort roots and shaking their river mud free. She sees once more the swirling of alkaline baths, the frothy hiss of bubbles that clung to linen fibers, the patient scrubbing that coaxed out mud and oil, the gentle slide of damp cloth into the current for a first, revealing rinse. Her limbs feel the echo of that labor. She flexes her wrists, mindful of the tender ache that follows scrubbing. She extends an arm and notices a thin sheen of sweat where skin meets sun, a cooling trickle behind her neck. A soft breeze brushes the nape of her neck, carrying with it a hint of lotus blossom drifting downstream from gardens upriver. She inhales and lets the floral note mingle with the echo of soapworts green, herbaceous scent still hidden in her hair. Turning her gaze to the linen draped on every reed, she watches the cloth's gentle snap in the wind. Fine tunics, bleached nearly white by the sun, ripple like water in slow-motion waves. She notes a slight mottling on one collar, a small rust stain that eluded the first wash, and files that away in her memory, a task for the afternoon's second treatment. Beneath the flowing cloth, the shadow patterns shift as the sun inches its arc across the sky, carving moving lacework onto the sands and the pottery jars. In this moment, she offers a silent thank you to the Nile. Nearby, the water glints in shifting diamonds, each one a testament to the river's bounty, life, cooling waters, the cleansing carried in every current. She closes her eyes and lifts her chin, imagining the river's pulse flowing through her own veins. The ritual of washing is rooted deep in this land, the linen she tends is more than fabric, each thread is an offering to the gods, a petition for health, for prosperity, for the cool relief of shade and running water. After a few more heartbeats of quietude, she sets the alabaster flask aside and reaches for a small loaf of fresh barley bread. Cradling it gently, she breaks off a piece and tastes its slightly nutty sweetness. The simplicity of it grounds her, like the loaf's tender crumb yielding beneath her teeth, her body, too, yields to this pause. She feels replenished, as though the warmth of the day itself has seeped into her bones in a gentle embrace. In these tranquil moments, she makes a plan. Soon, she will return to the work of cloth and water. Next comes the targeted stain treatment, a thick paste of natron and ash, pressed onto the stubborn collar edge she noticed only moments ago. She will use the slender twig brush she carved at dawn for just such occasions, gently coaxing out the blemish until the linen once again gleams. Then, a final aromatic rinse awaits, water infused with crushed coriander and lotus petals, a scented benediction to the day's rituals. But not yet. Now is the hour of reflection, when mind and body come into accord. The sun continues its measured trek, and the world seems paused, in perfect harmony with her own steady heartbeat. She stretches one arm overhead, feeling the stretch in her ribs, then lets it fall back to her side. Slowly, she rises from the stone seat and dusts the light sand from her linen skirts. She dips her fingertips into a shallow pool at her feet, letting cool water bead on her skin before leaving the sweet circular marks that vanish as quickly as they formed. As she straightens, she surveys the scene, tools at rest, cloth in transformation, the river in perpetual motion. A final sigh escapes her lips, soft as wind through papyrus reeds. Gratitude and purpose settle within her, gratitude for the shade of the palm, for the whispering water, for the exacting rhythm of her craft, purpose found in the knowledge that each piece of linen she tends will warm a child's sleep, lend dignity to a merchant's attire, or serve as an offering at the temple steps. With one last look at the midday tableau, she gathers her alabaster flask, her loaf of bread, and the small basket holding her special stain-treating paste. Shadows have shifted, and the sun has gained a slight tilt toward the west. Already, the afternoon beckons her back to bathe each garment in the gentle caress of cleansing waters and to carry on the ancient dance between river, stone, and cloth. Supported by the calm she has restored to her spirit, she steps forward to meet the tasks that await, ready to coax each stubborn spot into clean submission and to send every piece of linen forth, fresh and shimmering, under the blessings of the Nile. The sun, now past its midday zenith, filters through the fronds of the date palms, casting a pattern of gentle light and shade across the quiet riverbank. The laundress rises from her place of rest, where she has sat sipping cool water and allowing the warmth of the sun to lull her mind. In the hush that follows her brief pause, she gathers the tools of her next task, jars of concentrated alkaline paste, a small wicker basket lined with fresh cloth, and the slender twig brushes she shaped from young acacia shoots. Today's work is deliberate, focused on the second stain treatment, a final, targeted encounter with the stubborn blemishes that have eluded her first wash. She begins by placing her supplies upon a rough-hewn wooden block set low to the ground. With calm, measured movements, she unscrews the clay lid of a custard-colored jar whose surface still bears the faint fingerprint impressions of its maker. Inside lies a thick paste of ash, natron, and finely crushed soapwort roots, blended into a consistency more like whipped clay than liquid. The paste carries an earthy aroma, crisp and familiar, a scent that speaks of the desert salt flats and the rich silt of the Nile floodplain. Drawing a small wad of the mixture upon her fingertips, she considers the task before her. Among the linen awaiting her attention is a collar edged in deep indigo ink, its fibers stained by a scribe's hurried notation of accounts. The ink has settled stubbornly into the cloth's weave, refusing to yield under ordinary scrubbing. The laundress lifts the collar and inspects it against the dappled sunlight, tracing the jagged edges of each blot with a practiced eye. She counts the blotches in her mind, 7 dark splotches scattered along the fold. With deliberate care, she lays the collar flat upon a bed of fresh linen, creating a soft, supportive cushion beneath the stained fibers. Gently, she applies the paste to the first stain. The thick mixture forms a pale ring on the fabric, like a rising tide frozen in time. She smooths it outward with the heel of her palm, creating an even layer that reaches just beyond the ink's darkest boundary. The paste crackles softly as it touches the linen, sinking into the threads and seeping into the stain's core. Though still cool against her skin, the blending of alkali and plant oils begins to warm under the sun's gentle rays, activating its cleansing power. Next, the twig brush comes into play. She holds the collar taut with one hand, so the fragments of linen lie firm, without slack. With the other, she presses the brush into the center of the paste, then draws it outward in a careful stroke. Tiny bristles, resistant yet supple, catch on the subtle irregularities of the cloth. With each brush stroke, the paste lifts a smudge of ink and dislodges the tiniest particles of dirt. The process is slow, patient, even meditative, each pass over the stain a small victory in a larger war against concealment and time. After several minutes of gentle abrasion, the paste begins to dry at the edges, forming a delicate crust that flakes with the slightest movement. Where the ink once lay dark and defiant, the pale threads start to re-emerge. The laundress inspects her work, tilting the linen this way and that, looking for any trace of residual color. Satisfied but cautious, she readies her next instrument, a shallow clay basin filled with clear river water, drawn moments ago from a tranquil bend downstream. The basin's rim is smoothed by years of use, and tiny veins of mica sparkle faintly under the shifting light. She dips one corner of the treated cloth into the water, allowing the currents to swirl around the paste. Then, with a few deft motions, she directs the water across the stain, coaxing the softened paste to wash away under its flow. The faint hiss of displacement mingles with the ambient murmurs of the Nile and the distant chatter of waterbirds. Droplets bead at the edges of the stain before running off the cloth in slender rivulets, carrying away the last incarnations of ink. When the water runs clear, she lifts the collar to the light and watches as its fibers catch the sun, now uniformly pale once more. Yet her work does not end here. There are additional collars, tunics with mud-borne stripes, and the edges of linen veils marked by the residue of evening oils. One by one, she repeats the ritual: apply paste, brush with steady hand, rinse until clarity returns. Each garment receives the same level of attention, the same quiet respect for the fabric's history and purpose. She moves deliberately, neither rushed by the passing day nor distracted by the world beyond this simple task. The hush of her actions forms a kind of prayer, an offering to the river that sustains her and the cloth she brings back to life. As the final scrap of paste washes away from the last tunic's cuff, she lays the cleaned linens upon a reed mat, letting excess moisture drip back to the ground. The sun, now dipping toward its late afternoon course, warms the damp cloth in preparation for the fragrant rinse to come. In the distance, palm fronds sway against a canvas of soft gold, and the cicadas begin their quiet hum. The laundress straightens, gathering her brushes and sealing each jar of residual paste with careful thumbs. She pauses for a moment, inhaling the mingled scents of earth and clean linen, and then sets down her tools with a sense of completion. Looking out upon the river's lazily flowing surface, she contemplates the next stage of ritual, the aromatic herbal rinse that will infuse her work with the subtle perfume of lotus petals and coriander seeds. But before that final gesture of scent and softness, this second stain treatment stands as its own testament to care and meticulous craft. In the fading light, she whispers a silent thanks to the Nile, whose cool depths and gentle current have borne witness to centuries of cloth transformed. Then, with the same steady pace that has guided her through each chapter of the day, she moves toward the ceramic bowls awaiting their tender infusion of blossom and leaf. The late afternoon sun had softened to a honeyed glow by the time the laundress turned her attention to the final, most delicate stage of her ritual, the aromatic herbal rinse. After coaxing stubborn stains with concentrated alkaline paste and sending each garment through a first sun-bleaching ceremony, she now stood beside a low clay bench where 3 shallow ceramic bowls waited, each containing clear river water she had drawn at dawn. Soft reeds circled the edges of these vessels, their slender tips dipping into the water like curious fingers. In her hands, she held the final gifts of the riverbank garden, vibrant lotus petals, freshly crushed coriander seeds, and a handful of dried mint leaves, all carefully stored since early morning in woven palm baskets. With slow precision, she began by adding the blue-white lotus petals. Their thin, papery edges curled gently under her touch, releasing a faint damp sweetness into the bowl. Each petal was placed one by one, as if arranging a miniature blossom bed upon the water's surface. As she worked, the petals floated outward in a widening circle, drifting until they brushed the curved sides of the ceramic. Tiny air pockets formed beneath them, causing them to sit just above the waterline, suspended between bloom and liquid. A quail call sounded in the distance, and she paused to let the gentle chirp drift across the sunlit sands, soft and welcoming like a lullaby. Next, she took up the finely ground coriander, its warm, citrus-tinged aroma rising in a pale cloud that mingled with the lotus's sweetness. The rounded seeds, once crushed beneath a basalt mortar and pestle, had released their essential oils into a fine, earthy powder. With a practiced twist of her wrist, she allowed a thin stream of this powder to drop into the water, where it sank immediately in golden rivulets. Each powder trail spiraled toward the bowl's center, dissolving at the edges and leaving faint tendrils of scent in its wake. As the coriander met the water, she inhaled softly, letting the bright top notes of lemon and sage mingle with the warmer base hints of wood and spice. Finally, she added the mint leaves. She pressed each leaf between her fingertips, coaxing out the last of their cooling oil, then let them slip into the herbal melange. The leaves swirled gently, carried by the slightest current she created with a fingertip sweep. Tiny bubbles clung to each surface, bursting in silent puffs that scattered micro ripples across the bowl. The scent deepened, now green and refreshing, carrying with it memories of early spring soils near the canal's edge. Rising to her knees beside the shallow vats where the linen had soaked and scrubbed, she lifted a piece of fine white cloth, once stained with oil, now gleaming in the sun, folded it lengthwise, and lowered it into the aromatic liquid. The edge touched the water first, sending concentric circles of movement outward, brushing the rose-tinged lotus petals from their clustered formation. The cloth hung there, taking its time, absorbing the herbal infusion with deliberate slowness. She cupped her hands and guided the linen through a gentle back and forth, coaxing the fragrance deep between the fibers. The faded echo of yesterday's toil dissolved into this final, scented baptism. She worked methodically from bowl to bowl, moving through each linen piece, tunics, shawls, headcloths, immersing them in turn. As she transferred garments, she noticed how the water's surface changed, a fleck of green from the mint, a petal caught at the edge, a microscopic swirl of coriander oil. Sometimes she would pause to gather a dropped leaf and return it to the rinse, cupping it softly like a lost offering. The river, only a few meters away, murmured quietly over pebbles, its current a distant counterpoint to this closer, more intimate lullaby. Between immersions, she would lift a cloth from the water and let it drip, watching droplets form along the edges before plopping back into the bowl. Each drip echoed in the shell-soft hush of the late afternoon. Occasionally, a breeze would stir the reeds overhead, bringing the distant song of a kingfisher or the flutter of papyrus fronds. In these gentle interludes, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, anchoring herself in the calm heart of the moment. As the last piece of laundry completed its fragrant swim, she set it aside upon a smooth limestone slab warmed by the sun. The cloth lay there, damp and translucent, veined with the faint green-blue tinge of its infusion. Rising, she collected the 3 bowls, now ripening with a dense bouquet of coriander, lotus, and mint. She carried them to the small hearth where a few glowing embers remained from the morning's fire, careful not to spill a single drop. Leaning close, she inhaled again, drawing the blended scents into her memory like a gift for the night. The coriander filled her palate with a citrus warmth, the lotus petals a honeyed coolness, and the mint a flicker of fresh breeze. She allowed these fragrances to mingle with the weave of her own thoughts, sunlight, water, the hush of birds, until all sensation seemed to settle into a singular calm. When she finally stood and looked across the smooth, folded stacks of linen at her feet, she felt a deep, unspoken satisfaction. What had begun with coarse natron crystals and rough stone scrubbing now ended in this most elegant, sensory finale. The linens would soon pass through one final rinse in the clear river current, then onto the wooden beating bench and up toward the drying frames bathed in the dying sun. But for this moment, all was suspended in the scented bowls and the drifting petals. She closed her eyes, turned her face toward the west, and offered a silent thanks, to the Nile for its soft flow, to the earth for its cleansing minerals, and to the blossoms and seeds for their fragrant grace. In that lifted instant, the heat of the day seemed to slip away, leaving only the promise of gentle twilight and the comfort of work well done. Below the papyrus-lined bank, the river's steady song lulled her spirit. Small fish darted in the shallows, and a heron spread its wings before alighting on a distant island stump. The sharpened angles of stones and the sun-bleached hems of cloth all lay quiet in the fading light, as if holding their breath. Soon she would move on, final rinses, beating, wringing, and the last stretch of laundry upon drying racks, before folding each fragrant piece and storing it in cedar chests lined with fresh aloe leaves. But now, the world felt hushed and hallowed by the simple act of herbal soaking. A gentle pause settled over the riverbank, where cloth floated, tipped with green, and blossoms drifted like lost thoughts of dawn. And in that soft, enveloping stillness, the laundress allowed herself a final, deep breath of lotus, coriander, and mint. She carried the scent with her as she rose to gather the next bowls, ready to guide each piece toward its next transformation, moving ever deeper into the slow, timeless rhythm of ancient Egyptian washday. The sun sat low enough in the sky that its golden rays still carried the cool promise of early morning, washing light across the Nile's gentle current. The laundry station, a small flat of packed clay by the riverbank, felt serene after the quiet ritual of aromatic herbal rinses. Lotus petals and crushed coriander had softened into a faint, floral haze that lingered in the air like a long-forgotten dream. Now came the final act, the last rinses and the unhurried examination of each linen fold. Stepping barefoot onto the damp sand, the laundress took a slow breath. Water lapped at her ankles as she carried a bundle of bright white cloth to the river's edge. The current here curved in a gentle bend, forming a shallow basin of clear water that caught the morning light and illuminated the sand beneath in rippling patterns. She knelt, dipping a length of finely woven linen into the swirling pool. With each pass through the current, the cloth billowed and straightened, pale as a drop of moonlight. Tiny bubbles clung to the threads for a heartbeat before floating away downstream, whispering the promise of purity. The first piece, an ankle-length shift of the household mistress, floated free of suds, the gentle algae-tinged water rinsing any remaining alkaline trace. The laundress guided the fabric up and down, letting the current press through every fold. Her fingertips, cooled by the Nile's touch, felt the surface for any hidden grit. A single finger brushed along a sleeve hem, perfectly smooth. She paused, watching the light filter through the linen's weave, casting a soft lattice of shadow on her palm. In that moment, she could almost see the fabric story, from the hand-woven cotton fields to the starching vats and beyond. One by one, each garment returned to her hands, tunics, headcloths, and swathes of fine cloth embroidered with divine symbols. She lifted them high, allowing a shaft of sun to pass through the fibers. There, if any faint smudge remained, it would stand out like a stray star in the twilight. The river rippled under her gaze, as if granting permission to unveil each seam. Where necessary, she passed a fingertip once more through the flowing water, coaxing out the last shadow of soil. But more often than not, the linen emerged flawless, gleaming with the pure white clarity that had been her aim since daybreak. As she worked, a hush spread across the riverbank. The distant calls of waterfowl drifted by on the breeze, and the occasional plop of a fish breaking the surface created a soft counterpoint to the swish of cloth. Her breath followed the rhythm of the current, inhale as the fabric sank, exhale as she lifted it free. The process felt meditative, a gentle unfolding of time. She remembered how, in chapter 15, she had scattered lotus petals into the final wash bowl. Now, each linen carried that faint floral perfume, a memory of that soothing stage. Occasionally she paused to smooth a damp fold across her outstretched palm. The wet linen felt supple, yielding to the touch like new clay. She pressed the fabric between thumb and forefinger, testing for any lingering coarseness. The slightest roughness would betray a hidden trace of dust or oil, but time and care had served her well. Most often, her inspection ended in quiet satisfaction, a nod to the cyclical perfection of her craft. To ensure uniform clarity, she placed each piece on a low, flat stone beside her. Here, in the diffuse pink light of dawn, the cloth lay flat and open, the sun's rays distributed evenly over every panel. She adjusted a few edges to catch the light more fully, arranging sleeves and hems in orderly lines. As the breeze stirred, the corners of each linen lifted and drooped in a gentle dance, revealing the richness of each fiber, a testament to the skill woven into its threads and the patient diligence poured over it that morning. When the final garment had its turn, the laundress gathered the smooth stones she had used for scrubbing, rinsed them clean in a shallow pool, and set them aside to dry on a patch of sun-warmed clay. Her small wooden paddle, too, received a careful rinse before resting on the bank. Throughout this closing ritual, she whispered almost imperceptible words of thanks to the river. Each tool, each stone, each field-grown plant had played its part. The Nile, ever generous, had carried away the spent water, bearing off the scattered remnants of ash and soapwort to vanish beneath its surface. A single gauzy headcloth, still damp, floated like a pale bird on the water as she lifted it for one last glance. She held it before her eyes, scanning every inch against the light. In the translucent glow, she discerned the evenness of its weave and the purity of its hue. At that moment, she felt the deep satisfaction of knowing her labor would protect those who wore these garments, whether the matron of the house, the elders of the temple, or the young children whose linens she had washed earlier. By the time she had completed her inspection, the sun had risen a handspan higher. A soft warmth bathed the shore, coaxing the damp cloth toward full release of its final droplets. The laundress gathered the linens into neat, airy folds, tucking them carefully under her arm. Her heart, too, felt lighter for the day's work. In each satisfied nod she affirmed a centuries-old rhythm of life along the Nile's banks. Ahead lay the steady beat of chapter 17, where she would wring and gently beat the damp cloth to expel every last drop of water, preparing the fabric for the slanted rays of the afternoon sun. But for now, she paused at the water's edge, gazing downstream as the current carried the shine of linen into infinity. In that tranquil moment, all was in order, the tools lay neatly by, the linens gleamed, and the river flowed on, utterly faithful, quietly enduring, and eternally intertwined with the daily spell of cleansing and renewal. A gentle stillness hangs over the riverbank as the laundress shifts her focus from shining white linens to the task of expelling their last moisture. The midday sun, climbing toward its zenith, warms the clay-studded sand beneath her feet. A faint breeze ripples through the date palms, carrying the distant hum of cicadas. In this serene moment, the ritual of beating and wringing begins, a slow, deliberate sequence that prepares each garment for its final sunlit drying. The calm murmurs of the Nile provide a constant backdrop, a steady companion to her hands as they return to the tools she has arranged with care, low wooden beams, stout twisting posts, and lengths of braided cord. She gathers a small stack of damp linen, fine wraps, coarse tunics, and narrower sashes, folding each piece lengthwise with precise fingers. The folds must align so that the beat will travel evenly through every layer of fabric. She lifts the first bundle, feeling its weight, and positions it atop a smooth, low-slung beam. The wood surface is worn to a warm patina, polished by countless repetitions of cloth meeting grain. With a practiced motion, she draws her arms aside, then brings her fists down in measured rhythm, striking the linen firmly but without haste. Each thud is soft yet insistent. Water spurts in tiny arcs, catching sunlight for a fleeting shimmer before splashing onto the sand. With every beat, a satisfying echo resounds, the resonance of fabric releasing its last droplets, the gentle hollow of the wooden beam vibrating beneath the impact. Her arms move like pendulums, swinging with calm momentum, each strike as consistent as the one before. In her mind she hears the faint hiss of escaping water, the low murmur of the river, and the distant trill of marsh birds. The work is meditative. Her breath deepens, syncing with the beat's slow cadence. Each strike loosens hidden moisture locked deep within the weave, tiny beads that had clung stubbornly after the final rinses. She watches them detach, fall, and vanish, small miracles of cleansing seen only by the sunlit spray. After a dozen beats, she lifts the linen from the beam and drapes it across her forearm. She presses her thumb along the fold, feeling for residual damp spots. The cloth feels cooler here, but no longer sodden. Satisfied, she lays the cloth on a low stone beside her and reaches for a second fragment, an undyed white sash whose loose weave catches sunlight like woven air. She repeats the beading ritual with equal care. Her shoulders rise and fall in careful arches, her elbows pivot gently so that every section of cloth receives equal percussion. The rhythmic labor brings relief as water-stained fibers relax under her hands, contracting and straightening in response to each gentle blow. When the beading is complete, she moves to the ringing stage. Placing the damp garment on a flat mat, she gathers two edges of the cloth in both palms. Her fingers close around the linen as one would cradle a newborn bird, firm enough to hold, tender enough to avoid crushing. Slowly, she twists her hands in opposite directions, squeezing downward. Water spirals out in thin rivulets and drips, marking small rivulets on the mat. She twists until resistance eases, until the linen feels lighter in her grasp, until the bulk of moisture has given way. Then, still grasping the top corners, she shakes the cloth gently, loosening fibers separated by liquid. The sound is a soft snap, like the opening of a shell, as the fabric settles back into quiet repose. She repeats this ringing motion on each piece of laundry, long tunics, narrower headscarves, the stiff collars of working garments, adjusting the twist's angle to suit the weight and weave of every cloth. Thicker linen requires firmer pressure and a wider arc of the wrist, sheer wraps call for a gentler, more prolonged turn. In this work she finds an unhurried satisfaction, a dialogue with the fabric. Her skin, salted faintly by earlier splashes of river water, grows drier against the cloth's surface. She feels the tension ease from her arms, the pulses in her fingers soften, as if each twist has wrung out more than water, perhaps even the strain of early morning's labors. Around her, the world remains hushed. The Nile glistens in the sun's mid-afternoon glow, its waters flowing with eternal patience. A breeze stirs the laundry she has already prepared for drying, lifting corners skyward as though eager for their final cure. The wooden racks stand waiting nearby, slender frames of polished acacia bent into airy horizontals. Soon she will gather the now light parcels of linen and arrange them among those racks, but first the beading and ringing must reach flawless completion. Each cloth, now only gently moist, must feel supple yet cool, free of stiffness that trapped perspiration or river grit. As her work continues, her motions become a quiet dance. Her feet shift on the warm sand, one foot forward for balance, the other retreating as the beam absorbs each beat. Her torso pivots with the motion of her arms, forging a graceful arc of movement that conserves strength and preserves her calm. Tiny grains of sand cling to her ankles, flecked with the occasional dribble of water that slips past her grip. She takes no hurry. There is no urgency in this moment beyond the slow perfection of each twist and strike. Time pools around her like the Nile's waters at dawn, still, reflective, and timeless. Finally, with the last garment placed aside, she steps back to survey her work. A neat row of linen awaits along the racks, some pieces showing the faint quiver of droplets still held in sunlit weave, others nearly dry, soft to the touch and gently fragrant from the herbal rinse she performed earlier. The beating and ringing have stripped away excess water and revived the flax fibers, breathing new life into each garment. She breathes in deeply, savoring the quiet sweetness that lingers in the midday air, a subtle blend of clean linen, river mud, and pale cedar from the storage chests she will soon use. In this moment, as the cicadas crescendo and a heron arcs overhead, she feels a gentle pride. The ritual of laundry, so ordinary yet so intricate, has once again unfolded flawlessly. Each stage led naturally to the next, from rinsing to beating to twisting, and soon to final drying beneath the warm sun. The tools she has used lie ready by her side, wooden beams still damp, twisting posts glinting with water, braided cord waiting for any stray folds. She touches the acacia rack, testing its stability, and then turns, adjusting a few draped corners to catch the lingering rays more fully. Thus sealed by repetition and patience, her work here reaches a quiet pinnacle. The beating and ringing have prepared her linens for their final transformation under the sun. The river, wise and unhurried, continues its course, as it has for millennia, bearing witness to these small but essential rites. With soft footsteps, she gathers her tools and steps toward the drying frames, her heart light with the satisfaction of a task well done. Chapter 18 awaits, the gentle unfurling of damp cloth to the sun's warm caress, and the alchemy of light and air that will bring these linens to spotless completion. But for now, she pauses at the edge of her daily ritual, grateful for the simple harmony between labor and rest, and the timeless flow of water that sustains every stage of her work. The late afternoon sun drapes the riverbank in a mellow glow, its slanting rays cast through bending palms and rippling reeds. The laundress stands back from her work, the wooden bench still echoing faint thuds from her beating and ringing. Each garment now hangs heavy with warmth, its dampness reduced to a gentle weight. In this quiet moment between labor and rest, she gathers her slender drying racks, simple frames of polished acacia wood, joined with flexible leather laces that yield just enough to absorb the day's heat and the earth's cool support. She sets the first rack into the soft sand at the water's edge, angling its legs toward the west. The wood, sun-dried and oiled long ago, reflects a honeyed hue beneath her fingertips. Beside it, a second rack stands ready, its crossbars carved with shallow grooves to cradle coarse tunics without slipping. Strictly, the racks are identical, but the laundress has come to know each one by the way it responds to her touch, the slight give of the leather lash, the soft echo when she taps the lower rail. Today, she aligns them not in perfect symmetry, but in a gentle curve, embracing the river's slow bend and the soft lull of its current. She steps back, breath held for an instant, then breathes out with satisfaction. The first piece of linen cloth, still flecked with whisper-thin trails of natural starch, is draped over the upper bar. She smooths the folds with deliberate care, running her palms along the fabric's length, urging out any hidden creases. Her hands, still scented with the tang of natron and the faint sweetness of lotus and coriander, work methodically. A shallow trough beneath the rack catches the few final droplets that escape from the hem. The liquid glints like a narrow stream in miniature, reflecting the slow dance of sunlight through palm fronds. With soft snaps like tiny sails unfurling, the fabric catches a minor breeze. Cicadas hum in the grove of date palms overhead, their steady chorus merging with the distant plash of fishing boats drawing in nets. The laundress pauses to listen, allowing the dull percussion of insect wings and the mellow cry of a waterbird to settle into her bones. It is this soundscape, river, breeze, creatures small and unseen, that marks the final drying ritual, a gentle communion of cloth and air, repeated each day as the world tilts toward evening. She moves to the second rack, selecting a tunic of coarser weave. Its fibers, now pale and almost translucent, bear the faintest hints of the day's labor. She lays it carefully, its neckline facing the fading sun, so that the fabric will whiten further under the last amber rays. As her fingers travel across the cloth, she notes the remaining moisture still clinging to the threads. They warm almost instantly beneath her touch, tiny beads of water drawn toward the air. She tilts the bar ever so slightly, guiding the beads to the lowest point, where they gather and then drip free in slow, deliberate drops. Beyond the racks, a child's linen bandage, once stained with river clay, sways gently on a spare peg. The peg is tied to a reed stake, set just at the water's margin where a whisper of current can tease at the cloth's edge. The bandage moves with a patience all its own, twisting and untwisting in a soft hush. The laundress knows that by tomorrow's dawn, it will be entirely free of mud, its whiteness restored by sun and breeze alone. In the warm hush of the settling day, she adjusts the angle of the racks to chase the golden slant of light. A simple gesture, tilting the wooden feet deeper into the sand, lifting the far end a finger's width, but one that ensures each fold, each seam, catches the optimal warmth. She steps back again, assessing the arrangement as though reading a map. In her mind, she traces the path of the sun, how it will arc low behind the western hills, how tomorrow's dew will gather on these same fibers before the cycle begins anew. The air is laced with the scent of river clay warmed by sun, mingled with the sweet, resinous undertones of cedarwood racks that once held fragrant linens in the storeroom of a noble household. The laundress inhales quietly, committing this aroma to memory, the last of the day's labors, the first promise of rest. She lets her hands fall to her sides, fingertips brushing over the ragged twine belt that cinches her simple dress, loose and breathable for a long day at the water's edge. Soft shadows lengthen across the sand, marking the end of one chapter and the approach of another. The laundress moves from rack to rack once more, ensuring that each piece is free to billow. She catches a final glimpse of her reflection in a shallow pool, hair pinned back with a slender bone comb, skin dusted with fine suds from earlier scrubbing, eyes bright with quiet fulfillment. She offers a small nod to the river itself, as if to say, "Thank you," for its patient generosity, then steps away to retrieve a low stool. On the stool she sits and prepares a short prayer of gratitude. Her voice, soft as the river's sigh, murmurs thanks to the gods of water, earth, and sun. She prays that the coming hours offer gentle breezes and that no sudden cloud will dim these last rays. She prays for the cicadas, too, that their song continues to shield this place from the bustle of midday chores. There is no hurry in her words, only calm recognition of a day well spent. Dusk approaches, painting the sky in rose and violet. Long ribbons of cloud drift above the distant palms. The laundress rises, gathering her tools, the last of the scrubbing stones, now rinsed and stacked, the wooden paddles, cleaned and laid against the hearth, the empty clay jars, whose lids she will soon seal for tomorrow's cleaning agent blend. Each object finds its place in a woven basket, bound with supple reeds and set aside under the shade of a tamarisk bush. Before she departs, she takes one last stroll along the line of drying cloth. A gentle breeze stirs the fabrics, sending them to whisper against the wooden bars. She reaches out, touching one hem, then another, feeling the near-complete dryness. In a voice barely above a breath, she tells them to sleep now, to rest and hold the sunlight tight until she returns. These linens have borne the traces of countless mornings, dawn's first chill, the scratch of stone, the warmth of alkaline baths. Tonight, they will rest under the open sky, carried in memory by sun and wind, ready at last for folding in fragrant oil tomorrow. With that, she turns her back on the river, walking slowly along the moon-touched path toward home. Her heart is light, each step accompanied by the quiet chorus of cicadas still droning in the date palms. Behind her, the wooden racks stand sentinel, cloaked in evening hush. The laundry day nears its close, and as the sky darkens, the promise of tomorrow's ritual glows in the embers of a setting sun. The late afternoon sun slants low across the Nile plain, gilding the tops of papyrus stalks and casting long, honeyed shadows on the riverbank. A gentle breeze stirs the rows of drying cloth, and the laundress pauses for a moment to breathe in the warm, sunlit air. Each length of linen has been washed, rinsed, beaten, and sun-bleached until it is almost luminous, a soft white that seems to glow against the deep blue of the river. Now comes the final, tender work of restoring its loft, imparting a delicate sheen, and tucking it away in cedarwood chests for safekeeping. She moves slowly, as if in a quiet ritual. With one hand at the end of a folded garment and the other at its center, she lifts it from the row of wooden racks. The cloth is still slightly warm from its last kiss by the sun. She holds it aloft for a moment, letting its weight settle evenly in her hands. Then, in a rhythm as old as her own breath, she beats it lightly against the edge of a low, smooth bench. The thud is soft, a muted drumbeat that echoes in the hush of late afternoon. Each strike loosens any remaining stiffness, coaxing the fibers to relax and bloom. As she works, the laundress's thoughts drift back through the day's hours, the soft hiss of water escaping from soaked cloth in the alkaline bath, the gentle scrubbing on limestone slabs, the clear rush of the Nile as it carried away suds, the reassuring warmth of the sun. Each memory is threaded into the fabric itself, woven into every fiber. In this moment, the laundry is not merely clean, it is imbued with the passage of time and the quiet pride of hands well used to steady work. When the final beat has restored a gentle cushion to the weave, she lays the cloth over a low wooden frame, smoothing out any tiny wrinkles with fingertips that still carry a trace of river scent. Then she picks up a shallow bowl of sweet almond oil, warmed earlier by the fire kindled at dawn, and dips a fine, soft brush into its glossy surface. The oil is pale gold, as clear as melted honey, and carries a subtle fragrance that mingles almond blossom with a hint of wood smoke. Starting at one corner, she sweeps the brush in long, measured strokes. The oil seeps into the threads, bringing out a gentle luminosity and making the linen almost translucent in the slanting light. She works with a calm concentration, pausing to tilt the frame and catch the sun's reflection, ensuring that no spot is missed. Each pass of the brush leaves behind a faint sheen, as though the cloth itself is breathing, alive with softness. Once the oil has been applied, the laundress rolls the fabric carefully into a loose cylinder, testing its suppleness. Satisfied, she lifts it and carries it to the nearby cedar wood chest. The lid is carved with simple geometric patterns and the hieroglyph for purity, a silent blessing for the linens it will hold. She opens the chest, inhaling the familiar, resinous scent of Lebanese cedar, a scent that wards off pests and reminds her of distant forests beyond the desert. Inside the chest, she has already arranged a folded silk kerchief at the bottom, its pale mauve threads a cushion for the linens to come. The laundress places each roll of oiled, sun-bleached cloth in neat rows, aligning them by size and by the order of their use, daily tunics first, then bedding wraps, and finally ceremonial shawls reserved for special occasions. Between each roll, she slips a small sachet of dried coriander seeds and rose petals, an herbal ambrosia that will lend a faint floral whisper to the linens whenever they are drawn out. With each cloth tucked in, she murmurs a soft blessing in her heart, thanks to the river that carried away the day's toil, to the sun that bleached and warmed, and to the earth that provided natron, ash, and soapwort. This is more than storage, it is the closing of a circle that began long before dawn and will begin again tomorrow. The lines of her hands, stained faintly with alkali, trace the grain of the cedar as she settles the lid in place. A final tap with the palm of her hand seals the chest. The sound is reassuring, a soft drum in miniature that vibrates through the wood and echoes the earlier rhythm of beaten cloth. She steps back, smoothing her plain linen apron, now clean and fragrant, and stands quietly beside her work. Cicadas hum in the date palms, and a pair of kingfishers dart low over the water, their bright feathers flashing in the dying light. For a moment, she closes her eyes and lets the scent of cedar, almond oil, and coriander swirl around her, a cool, calming blend that carries her back to childhood mornings spent helping her mother on the same riverbank. The memory is gentle and warm, as if the past and present have woven themselves together as seamlessly as warp and weft. She tidies the small area around her, stacking wooden scrub boards, rinsing and setting aside smooth stones, and gathering the empty oil bowl to carry back to the hearth. The tools of her labor rest in patient silence, ready for tomorrow's cycle. She offers a brief, wordless farewell to the Nile, touching the palm of her hand to the river's edge. Even at dusk, its current flows with purpose, a reminder that time moves steadily forward, and that in each humble act of washing, there is a quiet sort of renewal. As she turns to depart, the sky is a soft wash of pale lavender and rose. The silhouettes of palm fronds sway gently above her head, their fronds whispering in the evening breeze. The cedar chest stands sentinel by the water's edge, its contents safe and waiting for the dawn. Her bare feet leave prints in the cooling sand, each step a soft imprint that the river will soon reclaim. In the hush of twilight, she carries with her the faint fragrance of clean linen and almond oil, a scent that will linger in her memories as she walks home under a canopy of stars. The day's work is done, neatly folded away, and in the quiet peace of the moment, she feels the same gentle contentment that comes after a ritual completed with care. The stage is set, the linens are prepared, and tomorrow the cycle will begin anew, each chapter washing, bleaching, and storing until the river sings its lullaby once more. Soft purple dusk settled over the riverbank, drawing a gentle hush across the Nile's lapping waters. The last of the daylight slipped beneath distant palm groves, leaving an evanescent glow that bathed the mud brick hearth in a warm, fading light. The laundress worked with deliberate calm, her hands guided by muscle memory as she rinsed each smooth scrubbing stone in a shallow bowl of cool, clear river water. Tiny streams ran over the stone's worn surfaces before trickling out and pooling on the clay hearth. Each stone, tumbled smooth by generations of service, bore faint lines and indentations, memory marks of countless garments scrubbed and soothed white under past suns. She placed each one gently into its woven basket, laying them side by side like resting friends returned from labor. A soft breeze drew in the scent of damp earth and dry reeds, carrying the distant croak of frogs from the marshes beyond. In the hush of impending night, cicadas had fallen silent, and only the river's murmur offered company. She paused, fingertips brushing a stone's rounded edge, recalling the morn when she had gathered clay-rich pebbles from hidden river inlets, then carried them here to join the ritual of cleansing. The memory was as tangible as the coolness in her palms. Now, as each stone found its place, the laundress felt the day's work settling into stillness, its energy dissipating in this closing ritual. By the hearth, the small clay pot that earlier heated water in the sunrise chill now lay empty. Its blackened belly spoke of flames long spent, flames that once coaxed the alkaline brew to life. She lifted the pot with an effortless motion, feeling its weight against her forearm, and tipped any lingering droplets into the bowl where the stones had swirled. River water pooled briefly, then seeped through the hearth's packed mud, carrying away last traces of soapwort and natron. For a moment she watched the disappearing currents as if bidding farewell to an old friend. Then she tucked the pot beside the hearth, aligning it with the woven mats she had set aside when the first light reached the river. Turning away from the hearth, her bare feet pressed into cool, damp sand. The banks of the Nile, once alive with her every step, now lay quiet and expectant under a sky where the earliest stars had begun to glimmer, faint pinpricks of light that promised a safe passage for the sun's return. The laundress drew in a deep breath, inhaling the subtle sweetness of hibiscus petals that drifted in the breeze, and closed her eyes. In that stillness, she whispered a brief prayer of gratitude to the river, naming it happy, giver of life and sustenance. The words tumbled softly from her lips, half song, half whisper. She thanked the Nile for its unceasing flow, for the water that nourished her people, and for the gentle currents that had carried away every stain from the fine linen of Pharaoh's household and the coarse tunics of workers alike. Her prayer was simple, heartfelt, unadorned by grand vows or lofty appeals. She lifted her hands in supplication, palms open to the darkening sky. The breeze, as though in response, stirred the loose strands of hair at her nape. A solitary star burned brightly overhead, and in that flicker of light, the laundress felt a quiet assurance that the Nile had heard her gratitude. She bowed her head, gathering the warmth of her words within her chest, then let the stillness back in. Gathering the small bundle of wooden paddles and scrubbing brushes, she eased them into a reed basket, nestling each handle among the others so that tomorrow's dawn would find them ready. The basket was heavy with tool and memory, but her shoulders bore the weight without strain. As she stood, the first full moon rose, pale and luminous, guiding her path along a narrow foot trail etched through groves of date palms. The soft rustle of fronds overhead sounded like a lullaby, and the lanterns left unlit on the riverbank cast only muted silhouettes, as if tiptoeing into sleep themselves. Her bare feet pressed into the cool sand beside the packed earth of the river road. Each step was slow, as though she wished to prolong the final moments of her labor. The crumbling mud walls of nearby cottages glowed faintly in the moonlight, and the distant silhouettes of other workers returning from fields and gardens passed her with nods of silent acknowledgement. In the wide, open air, the night-filled sky above the Nile seemed to hold its breath, its vastness a mirror to the river's own expanse. All around, life had paused. A cat slunk along the river embankment, eyes gleaming, hunting rodents that skittered in the reeds. The laundress paused at the sound of waterfowl stirring in the shallows, ducks and geese stretching leathery wings before settling back under the silent watch of the moon. She listened, savoring each small note, the hushed wash of water, the gentle snap of palm fronds, the distant hum of insects that had awakened in the cooler hours. This tapestry of sound, woven of currents and creatures, soothed her spirit as nothing else could. A slight breeze carried the faint, sweet aroma of lotus blossoms floating on hidden pools. She allowed the scent to drift through her senses, reminding herself of the aromatic herbal rinse she had prepared earlier, water infused with crushed coriander seeds and lotus petals, its fragrance still lingering in her clothing. Folding the edges of her humble tunic inward, she smoothed the fabric with the same reverence she had offered the pharaoh's finest linens. Each crease held a memory of meticulous rinses and drying in the midday sun. Now, in this twilight hour, the fabric rested lightly against her skin, a final testament to the day's labors. As she approached her small dwelling, its outer wall built of rubbed mud bricks and crowned with a narrow parapet of reeds, she paused one last time at the gate. Moonlight washed over the threshold, turning ordinary stones into pale gems. She set the basket of tools on the raised sill, then turned to face the river once more. For a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, drinking in the scent of water and earth. In the hush of night, she felt the day's exertion settle into her bones like gentle warmth, a reminder that her toil, though humble, was woven into the fabric of life along this great river. Her final act was simple, a whisper to the Nile, thanking it again for its constancy. Then, with a soft exhale, she slipped through the gate and into the cool interior of her home. There, she would set out a small bowl of leftover water by the door, an offering of thanks for the blessings of sustenance and peace. She would hang the day's aprons and cloth wrappings on hooks carved from palm branches so they might dry fully by the hearth. The soft glow of a single oil lamp awaited, its wick trimmed just so, ready to welcome the quiet night. Outside, the moon sailed higher, a silent guide for nocturnal creatures and distant travelers. The Nile shimmered in pale reflection, its surface calm, its secrets safe in the glow of starlight. Within her simple home, the laundress rested at last, her heart brimming with gratitude and calm satisfaction. The gentle undulations of the night lulled her mind, carrying her towards sleep with the promise of another dawn. When the sun rose again, she would return to these shores, gather clay-coated stones, and begin anew the ancient, comforting ritual of cleansing linen by the river's edge. But for now, in the soothing darkness of twilight and memory, her work was complete, her spirit at peace, and her song of gratitude whispered softly into the endless flow of the Nile.